Yeah, it does. Yeah. I mean, I think the Nantucket parcels.
Yeah, well, it came down by about 32 in Nantucket. So all I did was...
See, there's a lot of merged parcels out there that you look at the map and think, oh, they're really separate, but they're not.
What I'm going to actually do is send you the list that Debbie has created. There's some that we can't find that he's listed in the database. So that means that there's something.
There's some errors, I know.
Yeah, so I will do that tomorrow. She's taking the old list and I'll pull out the big one.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm going to use the old list with the new values until we kind of flush that out.
Right. Because plus had was a big bunch added last year.
Right, and see, that's kind of shame on me for not asking because I didn't realize. I had no clue that there was something because I
no. Well, if you remember originally she's like, oh, we're not doing this.
Yes, I know. And then I kept thinking, it doesn't matter. I'm like, I didn't use the list to do the recalculation. I used the list that I had to work on. That's why it matters. But that'd be fun. I mean, we actually call it to see if we have the old overlay file saved. So we can just rerun it with the new values, and it'll just pull all the same data, which will be perfect.
Right.
So it's really...
I know, it was interesting. I mean, the thing is, the point is, I tried to ProCo, which I don't know if which stands for Clubhouse and Courage. So that's exactly the system he wanted, okay? And, he wants to, pull out, if someone's receiving values, he wants to pull part of it. And that's what it looks like. So,
well, the funny thing is he's having a conversation. property oh, okay. To lessen the size. You start carving out people's lots and you're doing all this fun stuff, which I agree with conceptually. There's only one place to get it.
That's right.
And that's a sewer fund.
Yeah.
So you have to acknowledge that you can't encourage this.
And I can't pay for any more other things that I've got in the sewer. It's more than the taxes. Put it back on the taxes. At least I can deduct that. Or some of it.
The good thing is that you can't deduct the betterment itself, but you can deduct the interest. But the good thing is that your betterment payment decreases the basis of your house when you're selling.
Right.
You can take the interest, but you can't take the house.
Can you amortize that?
The betterment can be amortized over 12 years.
Okay.
But still, some of those betterments are 20 years. It's still 10 years annually or more.
Depends on your tax bracket, I assume.
Well,
Yeah. Oh.
I have to confirm.
Me down.
I feel this issue. I have to I'll find out. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask if you guys had a discussion yet on the capital items, whether we're going to fund them to a capital improvement.
Oh, the FinCom has not even made any decision on that. Yes, that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Hopefully, very soon. So, do you have all the information? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, hey, where do we get this?
So now I finally read that article in the bylaw. This is the one going from, what are we, 20 something to BR equipment.
Equipment, yeah. Yeah.
So you picked up those two lots. Which were 1 acre lots.
No, we didn't go away up there. I was hard enough getting that. No, it's the use chart is in the bylaw. It's in the back of the bylaw. But you can go online. The use chart, when you go online.
Oh, it's not with the rest of the bylaws.
Is there an easy place to find it?
Yeah.
It's at the, if you go to chapter 139, at the very top, there are 2 PDFs.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, the main thing down there is the swimming pools, and again, we've heard from some, but I needed to hear from the rest of them.
So is that like a no?
That would be a no. No use, correct. And it's also a lower height. It's a lower height, and it's a 20% reduction in ground cover compared to what we have now. So it's, it's scaling it back for a country district. The R20 is really a town district, not a country overlay.
No, I can, I will, I'll just,
Yeah, I think so. The setbacks increase, the ground cover goes down, the height goes down. And the pool. And again, we've asked, like, we're going to so proof that people out there don't want pools. There's a group right in there. What have we heard from Quinnet?
Quinnet, I've only heard Jefferson calls, I haven't listened today.
can everyone stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm going to call the meeting of the Board of Selectmen for January 13th to order. Tonight we have a workshop meeting, so it's a little different than our normal meetings. We have less items on their agenda, no public hearings, and we are in casual attire. So, first thing we'll do is accept the agenda. If anyone has no problem with it, we'll accept it as written. Announcements, Libby? I got it, Libby.
I guess we...
Just that
just
the meeting
one.
is videotaped and the audio recorded for everyone in the audience. The first item for discussion on our workshop tonight is a discussion regarding bike routes in and out of town. Who's going to start us off? Mr. Burns with this, or? Sounds good.
Mr. Chairman, while he's getting ready there, or we're getting the thing up, just to remind you, I think this is probably in your packet, but at a recent meeting, the board wanted to understand better the location of any existing bike routes, how they're identified, what the pros and cons are, the location of any future bike routes, this is all in and out of town, when they're scheduled, how much they're estimated to cost, are they in a plan, things like that, and other feasible options that could get bikes in and out of town more safely than perhaps now, if that's something we can even assess. They could potentially be implemented for this coming summer and what those pros and cons are. And I think Mr. Burns has just what this is.
We found something with a PowerPoint presentation, so we're going to hope there's no unwanted magic with the presentation. So anyway, I'll walk it through you. In your packet, this is an abbreviated presentation I'm going to give, by the way. It's 13 slides, much more reduced from what was included in your packet, but I think what was included in your packet is valuable information and just helps out with the education of the board. What was included are the description of the goals and objectives by the NPDC, which also serves as the goals and objectives of the master plan, which is what was mentioned is basically a strategic plan for the town, and the plan basically outlines what those strategies are. What I'd like to do, so I included those in the packet, as well as some proposed routes that were recently discussed over the summer, and a memorandum from traffic safety with recommendations based on that proposed route. And again, the presentation summarizes all of the initiatives, past, present, and future, of bike pedestrian improvements in and out of downtown. And I think it must be said that I'm going into a little bit of a history lesson with this, just because it was mentioned that not a lot of work has been done in the last 10, 15 years. There's been no projects, and the capital improvements that we submitted were basically recycled from previous years, and frankly, it was wrong. So I'd like to just go through what those history lesson was. It's broken down. First, I'll just show you the existing map. There's about 33 miles of bike path on the island now, which is the most any community maintains in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And there's been added since 2004 almost 8 miles, so about almost a 25% expansion of the existing system in the last 10 years or so. And there's almost 30% planned for future implementation. And these are all strictly bike facilities, not necessarily talking about the sidewalk infrastructure, which we talked about later. As far as the presentation of improvements go, I'm going to break this down into geographies of the downtown. I think that it might be easier for the board to understand, because there was a lot of discussion about the approaches from the north of town and the west of town and the south of town. So I'm going to focus on that, the improvements in the downtown area, because the downtown's important, but also talk about the different approaches from around town as part of this past, present, and future initiatives summary. Again, here's highlighted in purple some of the paths that have been extended in the last 10 years. And what's in red here is the approved bike route that's existing now, that's signed and on different maps that the tourists may use in the summertime, but anyone can actually use with the stickers and the signage and stuff. So just running through as far as past initiatives in the downtown area, I mentioned there were bike route wayfinding improvements, stickers and signage that's been implemented through a combination of work from the Visitor Services and Young's Bike Shop. There's been they're faded now, but a testing of bike route stencils that will be started up again soon and hopefully be maintained into the future. But there was an evaluation of bike route stencils as a way of enhancing the wayfinding for bicyclists in and out of town. And there's also been a number of improvements for bike parking, adding bike racks, finding a bike rack that looks attractive in the downtown area, and it's one of the reasons why downtown is nice and not including anything that would be an eyesore. Add an amenity, address a problem, and have it be aesthetically pleasing. And lastly, there's work by the Roads and Right-of-Way Committee, which they'll go into, Alan Reinhardt will, about the survey work of sidewalk conditions in the downtown area. So that's work that had been done in the past in the downtown. North of town, there's an extension of the Cliff Road bike path about a half a mile from Crooked Lane to Sherburne Turnpike. That was a way of improving bike flow from the northern approach. There's a picture of Selectman Atherton in there from 5 years ago. You look just as good now as you do then, Mr. Atherton. So,
you're going to go far, Mike.
any compliments I can squeeze in? It's
he's wearing the same clothes too. Same sweater.
Let's all focus on that. Okay, so those are the improvements on the north side of town. As far as the west side of town, there were what's on the map on the left is very hard to read, but basically it's a list of alignments that can be used for bike traffic from the Quaker Cemetery, Nantucket Road, using Quaker Road and Prospect Street down to where the mill is. So that corridor there was it really needs to be improved to accommodate bike and pedestrian traffic more. That evaluation was done in 2010. Also, what's been done is the resurfacing of the Nantucket bike path, which is there's a picture there, and then the implementation of the Hummock Pond Road bike path. That's something else that's been done very, very recently. Is an accomplishment to improving bike pedestrian connection in and out of town. As far as the south side of town, this is the area, say, along Pleasant Street and Orange Street. I could go into a long history of the Mid-Island area. I won't, just to say that there has been some streetscape improvements that have been implemented now. And there was some conceptual work for how to actually get bicyclists in and out of between the downtown area and the Rotary, using a combination of roads. And out of that work came a recommendation for widening out Orange and Washington streets to accommodate accept bike lanes along those corridors, as well as an improvement of the old railroad causeway here between Orange Street and the end of Washington Street extension to accommodate bike traffic. And this is something that's been, again, something that's been done in the past, and it's going to be implemented now and into the future. For the downtown area for present conditions, there's a photo of installation of bike bollards. Again, this is one of these attractive pieces of equipment added to the street infrastructure to address a concern, a problem, and that's for bike parking. Those were installed with, I would say, a grant from Remain Nantucket to help address that problem. There is a phase 1 of sidewalk improvements. Again, those improvements were identified through a combination of Roads and Right-of-Way Committee as well as some outreach to other committees within the town. Phase 1 of that, improving the connections between the ferry terminals, as well as going further to the connections between the town parking lot and Children's Beach to get into a wider berth. But this is basically a harborfront improvements, something you could probably call it an Esplanade project along the harbor front of bike pedestrian circulation between these areas. But that's something that's in the capital plan as a request for this year. And then lastly, some of you may have attended the Worcester Polytech presentation on looking at accessibility of sidewalks, not just the condition, but how accessible they are for those with mobility needs. So Worcester Polytech did a breakdown and an evaluation of that, which staff helped out with. But that's another present initiative that's been done very, very recently for the downtown. North of town, not a lot, other than there are some sidewalk improvements, basically from the end of the extension of the Cliff Road bike path at Sherburne Turnpike down towards the vicinity of North Liberty Street, a sidewalk along a section of North Liberty that right now does not have one. Another section of sidewalk along Westchester Street where there's a missing gap. So those are areas that are right now we've identified as needing to be improved to accommodate pedestrian traffic more. So that's something that exists now. Also, what exists now is on the west side of town, staff is working on the extension of the Hummock Pond bike path, basically from the intersection of Hummock Pond and Milk Street going on into town. There's the Mill Hill path, which is part of the Woodland Hill subdivision. That's something that, again, should be ready for the summer of 2016. And again, to belabor the point of the sidewalk improvements, there are additional sidewalk improvements in the vicinity of downtown along the western side of the downtown area. And then there's the proposed historic bike route that was reviewed by the board in the spring and the early summer of this year. That it's been recommendations have been made by the committees and hasn't yet been approved by the Board of Selectmen.
Just to try and be clear, on Joy Street, the red going off to the left, yeah, that one there, was that in 15 or 16?
Are we talking Milk Street right here?
No, back up on Prospect. Yeah, that one, Bob, right. When's that scheduled for?
It's in the...
I wasn't sure the red and the red above, so...
Sure. What's in red are needed sidewalk improvements. We've identified this as needed, included in the plan for an improvement. It's not in the 2017 request. It will be in a future year request for sidewalk improvements. Right now, there were about $10 or $11 million in overall sidewalk improvements identified. What's requested this year of town meeting is $1.5 million of that $11 million in total projects. So we're calling it phase one, and I guess the idea is to be future phases. That is not a phase one. No.
That section's not in phase one.
Correct. As far as the south side of town, some of the streetscape along Pleasant Street is starting to be implemented. There are other improvements. Again, the future phases of the in-town bike path along Orange Street and Washington Street. Those are included in the town's capital plan for this year. And again, to belabor the point, there are other sidewalk improvements in that area that have been identified and will be improved as future improvements, future phases.
So, Mike, again, just to be clear, the Washington Street one in FY17, is the street going to be widened?
That's the concept, yes. Widened out to have 4-foot bike lanes on either side of the roadway. And
the town owns enough space to do that now?
Not necessarily. There probably need to be slivers taken, a foot, 1 to 3 feet taken from abutting properties. Maybe in some areas and in some areas there's plenty of room, but there will be some right-of-way needs.
Okay, thank you.
More than
wanted
likely.
to get that. Yep.
And Mike, real quick, just on Sparks, I know there was talk about getting that improved. There was kind of a work between the Stop and Shop and Boys and Girls Club to improve that for access. Do you know when that's slated to be completed, or widened or improved? I
do not, other than there's funding that has been cobbled together recently to implement that. But I don't believe there's a schedule on actually advertising it or implementing it just yet, other than the money's been cobbled together to actually do the work. And to wrap it up, we'll go to the future areas, and this is basically what the board is desiring is some input on the bike routes in and out of town with some problems identified for addressing those. From the northern approach, again, Cliff Road is essentially the main access from the north side of town to the Cliff area. There's some on-street parking conflicts. In your packet, there's some pictures that illustrate the issue of cars parking on the sidewalk and into the road that narrow the road down somewhat, which it's an obstruction for a clean flow of traffic. That's a conflict. That's if that wasn't there, perhaps it would be a better environment for biking along Cliff Road. I would say absolutely it would be, but there's reasons why parking was removed and then put back along Cliff Road. There's a demand for parking. Along the west side of town, what's in purple are the proposed bike routes, not necessarily in the town's official bike route, but proposed bike routes that, again, there's some parking conflicts along sections of Milk Street that I think everybody's kind of aware of, from basically the Civil War Monument up to along Milk Street up to the intersection of Prospect and Quaker. If those on-street parking spaces weren't there, perhaps you would have a cleaner flow of traffic for vehicles and bicyclists without having the road narrow down to one lane for all those different uses. Perhaps that would be safer and more convenient and more efficient. Other areas, the proposed bike route, historic bike route, I'm showing this in blue going into town. There were some conflicts that were identified with the board. There's some right-of-way conflicts along Prospect Street. The idea of widening Prospect Street out for bike lanes just to get up to Mill Street, there were some right-of-way issues in order to realize that improvement. There's also some on-street parking conflicts at the intersection of Pleasant Street and High Street. In that vicinity, there's approximately 7 on-street parking spaces that should be removed in order to have, a clean, unobstructed flow of bicycle traffic in and out of town along that corridor. And lastly, along the southern approach of town, again, what's highlighted here is those on-street parking spaces on Pleasant Street that don't really help out, and then on-street parking down by the Stop and Shop that some may feel doesn't contribute to an efficient flow of bike, pedestrian, vehicle flow, and could provide some opportunity for conflict along those flows. So that's a very picky thing to pick on, but it's a conflict.
But the concept there is it slows down traffic a little bit with the parking there, so it's
exactly,
it accomplishes something, but in a different way.
Exactly. In that situation, the conflicts actually slow down the traffic, so you get another outcome that creates a safer environment. Again, I'm trying to be picky and just pick on things that could be improved. But so these are the 3 approaches from the south of town, west of town, north of town, and the routes that have been proposed, and the routes that are signed and documented now. If there's any questions about some of these, I've identified some potentials for improving those, and some that need vote by the board because, again, these aren't that will require some capital funding to implement them. So if you have any questions about this, I'm here to answer those. Thank you.
Well, sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Rick. I was just going to ask if you had questions.
Back to the Prospect Street one that you talked about, Mike, and you said there were, the circle there. You said there were conflicts. I think you meant from the end of the bike path to the corner there?
Right-of-way conflicts.
And what are those? I mean, what do you mean?
On the northern side of Prospect Street, there's basically the layout of Prospect Street isn't wide enough to accept a sidewalk, 2 vehicle lanes, and 2 4-foot shoulders for bike lanes. There's not enough road width for that. So there's some trees and some curbing, and there are houses right close to the road. But essentially, their property, the buildings wouldn't be impacted, but the property line is, you need an extra 2 feet, essentially, to implement that strategy.
It would require some takings, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, and there are trees in the way that would need to be removed.
But didn't we see a plan a while back to implement a bike lane right there?
A sidewalk. There's an existing area 5 feet along the southern curb line of Prospect Street for a 5-foot wide sidewalk. That was always the improvement, not necessarily a 10-foot wide bike path. There's just really not the room there.
Right, but
so a sidewalk improvement.
But it wasn't sort of the discussion at the time that the 5-foot sidewalk might in reality function 2 ways. Even though it isn't ideal, it might be better than what exists today. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what I thought I heard, and that's why I thought it was still under consideration to at least do the 5 feet, but I guess not. I mean, I'm trying to understand why not.
Or maybe another way was to have,
or is it
a bike, pedestrians on one side, and then that gives you more space or like you have a brick sidewalk on one side, and then you have a lane, 4-foot bike lane on both sides.
Correct.
So
that was the idea. It was basically to not have bicyclists put into the roadway or just thrown into traffic, the way some people have characterized it, but widen the road out to where there's a dedicated lane for bicycle traffic going one direction and another dedicated lane going the opposite direction. That creates a safer environment. There's no conflicts with traffic. There's no sharing of the road. To accomplish that, you need to widen the road out, 8 feet or more if there's grade issues. So that was the need. Essentially, if we were going to progress that as a capital project, that needed a vote and support of the board. That was very contentious about the removal of on-street parking that went along with that. So it is where it is now.
Do you support that idea? Do you think that makes sense?
As what's described in the memo from Traffic Safety, that's what we support. If you want to realize that as a route, and
I
communicate
guess
that
I'm
to the
asking
public.
You, traffic safety, and you.
Removal of the on-street parking spaces and the widening out of Prospect Street would be required. That's the recommendation if that's the desired path to go. But it needs this board support.
Understood, but I'm asking if you personally think it's a good idea to go out that way.
With those other
With those things,
conditions,
if
correct.
if we put all that in, you'd support it, yeah, okay.
I don't really get a vote. I get a.
But
No, but
but we could just fix the situation on Prospect Street.
Well, that's sort of my view. You come to the end of the hard bike path now, and people are on it, and then if they want to continue up towards Nantucket or wherever, they've got to go into the street. And
But isn't the mill path that's going to go into the subdivision going to take them from there up that way and around it and avoid Prospect?
I think that's the idea, Bobby. But
I mean, then you could get you could go right to the Cisco bike path, and you'll be able to. Eventually, they're going to cut across. What is it?
Wind Street.
yeah, Wind Street. No,
Wind
that's-
Street. Yeah.
So that'll help,
Right.
and hopefully next year we'll have a capital. I know on capital programs we approved funding for the the taking of Wind Street to proceed with that. Assuming it passes town meeting, we can proceed with the design and the construction of that.
And that'll be a beautiful ride along this and along the edge of the cemetery and then across. It'll be pretty.
So it seems that the choice presented is sort of going all the way on Prospect Street, or if that's too difficult, then we have a bit of a time delay until the rest of the path over Mill Hill and down Wind Street is accomplished. I mean, I think that's what you're saying, because that could take some time.
That's in the works, though.
I'm not saying it's not in the
Correct.
works, Libby, but
The problem
couple of
is,
years.
I mean,
but I just want to be
this is-
direct.
This is a
Bobby,
little
you know?
deceiving because it shows this little blue arrow, and then it takes a right down Mill Street. But you're still going to have the same problem here that I see, is that you're dumping that bike traffic from Surfside or from Milestone into a busy street.
Right. Yeah.
Where if they go up and around,
So the idea is, even aside from turning right there, if they want to keep going straight, you're right back in a narrow street again.
Right.
And if you haven't continued the sidewalk all the way to Milk Street, maybe you haven't accomplished what you need
Right,
to
and if
accomplish.
you're trying to go all the way to Milk Street, those houses are right on the road, the
Oh,
poles are
it's
right in
terrible.
the sidewalk.
It's bad enough for cars.
Right, yeah. And that is the main route to the dump, so it gets a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
From that side of town, it's the only way to get there.
Changing off of this a little bit, Orange Street, you're saying you'd put a bike, you'd mark that with with basically paint and have a bike lane down Orange, is that? Like from-
Which section of Orange? The one-way section or the two-way section?
One-way section.
The one-way section that's being recommended for sharrows, basically stenciling the road to inform drivers that there's bicyclists that are going to be sharing that route between the parked cars on the street and the trees on the other side of the road. So it's basically a shared corridor for going out of town because it's a one-way road, obviously.
But
It seems like, sorry, because after we had this conversation, I went there, and looking at it, it almost seems wide enough to put a 4-foot bike lane between where the cars park and the road. People would still drive on it, sort of, but you wouldn't park on it, and
Yeah.
it almost seems like you could do that.
In a lot of areas, you can, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's some areas where it necks down to where that would get a little complicated. That's
Right.
probably why it hasn't been done. But yeah, it's there's some opportunities to do that, and maybe you shift the curb lines. Or
Yeah, that's because
Right now it's
that
a-
to me would make that to me makes getting out down Orange a lot easier. Because my concerns is I wrote a couple things. Is the in-town portion of this, no matter where we go right now, I bike every day, it's unsafe. It's, people with families, it's just, you're taking your life in your own hands, so I think, Bobby said it the best when we talked about this the last 2 times ago, was we need to find a safe way to get people from in town to the beginning of the paths, which are all great once you get there.
Mhm.
So I think that's the goal. And how do you, and I think we're all kind of in agreement on that. How do you do that? And I think it's a pretty big priority, and I'm glad we've come back to it. And so if you can do that on Orange, here's another question. Have you thought about it for sort of making Cliff Road and Westchester one way, or Pleasant Street one way? Because then you would have, the thin streets we have, you can't make Prospect one way because there's no way. But some of these others, you might be able to go one way, one direction, one way back, and then you'd have room for parking and a bike lane. You'd take no parking away, have a bike lane in the traffic. So I was wondering if that's ever been analyzed or thought about.
Pleasant Street, yes. Cliff Road and some of these other streets, no. Well, I say no, but essentially, I guess in 1996, there was a traffic study done that kind of looked at some one-way scenarios, and basically it just, because of the truck routes and the need to get in and out of town with large vehicles, that just wasn't practical. So it was dismissed and never really was realized. Even through subsequent traffic studies that were done, it just basically dismissed using like Sparks Avenue as like a one-way in an orange street in front of, like, say, the Marine Home Center. Not have that be one way at all, just because it would just impact movement of freight.
Yeah, no. But we've sort of corrected the truck route. Like the Cliff Road was the, what do you call it? The auxiliary, the secondary truck route.
You say we've corrected the truck route, which we have. But when that extension from, was it Duck Pond or whatever it's called there? Goose Pond across, to get the bikes out of those three corners on the truck route and onto that back road. I mean, yeah, they're going to dump out onto Orange Street, and yeah, Orange Street's busy, but there'll be a bike lane on each side, and they will have to cross Orange Street. But that's the most dangerous as far as I'm concerned. Those three bends in that road, when these trucks are coming around them, cars coming around them, cars backed up. If we can get them to go straight down Washington Street and then down Washington Street Extension and across the creeks there, it's going to make a world of difference. And it'll get everybody out to the rest of the bike paths. And if the other one goes in up here by the cemetery, now you can pretty much circumvent the island around, with the exception of Cliff Road. You got to figure out how you're going to get them from Cliff Road back to town. And maybe you bring them down Lincoln Circle and down the Stone Road there into the jetties, and not have them come down the bottom end of Cliff Road. But I don't know. I mean, that's
because one of my thoughts looking at it, because Cliff Road, it isn't even just it's a bike thing, but it's also, you can't even use the sidewalks. The sidewalks are either parked on or they're full of telephone poles. So people, if they want to walk up Cliff Road, they go back and forth through the traffic. I have pictures for some other reasons, but people with families and people with baby carriages and everything else, they can't even walk up Cliff Road. And so how do you fix that, and make it safe, And so one of my thoughts was, do you go out just outbound up to, is it one way up to Liberty and is Westchester one way back in, and you fix two at once? I don't know. I don't know what I'd have to put on the computer and see what it generated traffic wise.
Yeah, I think if you implemented this sidewalk improvement basically from Sherburne Turnpike to North Liberty Street, that would give you a continuous sidewalk connection. If there was a solution to the on-street parking and there was a way to relocate that on-street parking to some other location, or just remove the on-street parking and figure it'll take care of itself, that gets rid of those conflicts. But you'd have a pedestrian connection. There's really no room for bike lanes along Cliff Road along this section, and I don't know if the street infrastructure in like a Westchester and North Liberty Street, if there was like a fork in the road, say, at North Liberty, and to go into town, you used a combination of Liberty and Westchester and Cliff Road to get out of town. I don't think that infrastructure could take it.
Yeah, North Liberty again is too thin, regardless, and that sort of has to be. I'm looking at that as that has to be two-way, So I don't know. It's sort of.
Yeah.
But I think what you're suggesting, Matt, is maybe there's some things we can do, in regards to parking on sidewalks to maybe make that easier for folks. At the very least, the pedestrians walking on the sidewalks.
Well, I'm not even into the sidewalk issue yet. I'm just saying there may be ways to tackle this that by making certain roads one way that are thin, that as long as it doesn't impact traffic, you may be able to get the same amount. You may be able to take that thin road, have the cars fit, the parking fit, and the bikes fit, and just not go two ways on certain roads. And if you can figure out which ones of those will work properly, there's an outbound and an inbound. And it's not just the Cliff. You might be able to do it in the Pleasant Street area, one going in, one, Fair Street going in, and Pleasant going out, or something. That then you're talking about bike paths that just are costing you paint. You're not losing parking spaces, and you're paying for paint and painting. So I'm just sort of saying, has that been
looked at for that reason.
I just wanted to note that it's not used all the time, but on occasion, and it's been getting used more often than not in the last year. Cliff Road is used as the reverse truck route.
Yeah.
And so making that one way would make directing truck route traffic that way difficult. So just keep that in mind.
No, I understand that. When we were fixing the truck route, they were coming through there. It was a death zone. I'm surprised someone didn't get killed when it happened. The guys were going to the boat at like 60 miles an hour, and they didn't slow down until they hit the curb at 40 or 50 miles an hour till they got to the curve at Cliff, like sort of where you have the circle.
Mm-hmm.
They would go by there in the morning so fast you couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And there were you have cars screeching, and it's a mess.
Yeah, but that's a straight road that probably has the turning radiuses and stuff to handle the freight traffic, one that's needed in emergency cases. I really don't believe that North Liberty Street in Westchester,
They can't, no.
They just wouldn't be able to be used as the alternative truck route.
No,
So
they
that's
can't.
why
No,
it wasn't looked at.
No, they couldn't.
Any other questions?
So, Mike, I guess just to summarize, you're asking us to move forward on a couple different recommendations as far as, just to be clear, approving the historic in-town path, which we support, or route, and marking Orange Street for a lane or a, stenciling. And is there anything else I'm missing? Or I'm just curious what the recommendation is.
I was asked to give a presentation of the initiatives to go in and out of town.
We just kind of have to pick.
Like I said, I didn't pull anything that wasn't documented in a regional transportation plan. Every one of these projects that I've discussed here have a reference number and are in a book that not a lot of people read because it's boring, but at least they're referenced in a plan that's approved by a board.
Yeah.
That's within a budget that's fiscally constrained. So there is a plan. That's the first thing. So I'm just basically doing a book report of what's in that deal basically with the routes in and out of town.
Great. And so I guess just to finalize, Bobby, one of those recommendations would be to mark the current route or maybe improve the markings. That had been talked about a little bit. Is that clear? Or?
The stenciling of the route, if the board would like to support that, especially these proposed bike routes, stenciling those, that would be great if the board would take action on that. The historic bike route, I think I spoke prematurely. That's actually not in the plan because it didn't have action or support from a board. But if you would like to have that implemented, the ball's always been right here to get action from the board on that because I can give you a recommendation, but it just needs to have an approval by the board.
Thanks, Mike.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is David Gagnon. I'm the Executive Director of the Mariah Mitchell Association. We obviously have we're a big advocate of bike trails. I use them all the time. On Milk Street, we have our observatories there, both of them. We use them all year round. In the summertime, we have almost 3,000 visitors that use them starting around 8:30 in the evening till about 10 o'clock at night. We have two concerns. One is that if any of the poles are moved over, there's any lighting, that lighting be set up in a way that doesn't interfere with our work that we do. And at this point, we've had the town has worked with us and Verizon, and we put some shades on those lights, and that's worked out well. We just want to hope that if there's any future lights, that there directs the light down so it doesn't interfere with the research that we do and the public observations. The second thing is that because we have all those visitors, we do use the parking along the road on Milk Street where I believe the bike path will be, and that's the concern, is that any work that's done there is at least considering the historical use almost half a century now, where we've used that space and people have parked probably about 20 cars at a maximum along that way there. But once again, it's at night. It's not during the day. Obviously, we're only there in the evening, so usually around 8:30 to 10. So I'd appreciate any consideration there to make sure that we can continue to offer this service to the community and to the visitors of Nantucket. Thank you for giving me a moment.
Just to be sure, you're talking, the observatory is opposite the... Yeah. Okay.
They're building that section now, actually. It's the one we had.
It's the one we just talked about, right?
At the county.
Well, here's because they park, right now they park sort of across next to the cemetery.
That's correct.
And then
Yeah.
they come across the street.
That's right.
So we're going to take that space and we're going to build a bike path there.
Right.
Now, how much of the land do you own is there a way to cut out parking spaces adjacent to your property?
We own very little land along that side.
Right.
Yeah, it's a pretty small lot. It's pretty much the two observatories and go out maybe 30 feet on either side and come down to the road.
Right,
So,
yeah. Because I could see,
Yeah.
We're going to use the bike path as a parking lot.
yeah, which you can't do. Which we want to say, I would like, maybe you can do it, but I would like to set up something where you don't have to have, cars parking on bike paths. People are still biking in the evenings. So, I think we have to think that one through.
thank you.
Yep. Mr. Burns?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, that has been discussed, and there's some opportunity to clear on the observatory side of Milk Street to create some parking spaces there. It's I'm thinking in the vicinity of 10 parking spaces. There may be demand for more than that, but that's what can be done on the observatory side of the road. Beyond that, we looked at different combinations of having people park in the cemetery, but again, that's the cemetery probably doesn't think that's a great idea. So you do have a conundrum there, and it's
it's no different. Every time you have a funeral, there's going to be 200 cars on that bike path. So, depending on who it is that's getting buried. I mean, we've all been there and we've all parked there. So,
Hopefully for a short time.
Yeah.
So is it in the plan already to do the kind of clearing you're talking about in front of the observatory? Is that a done deal, so to speak?
It's a note to do. So that's one of the concessions, I suppose, that we were going to include in it. I mean, and it's not a great deal of work other than just clearing some low-lying shrubs.
Well, it sounds like sufficient mitigation, though. It helped, it improves the situation.
Yeah.
Well, I have no problem with the stenciling. I think it's a great idea. It does remind people when they're driving that they're not on the road alone. Although we have gotten pushback in the past. I remember the yellow lines on the Cliff Road bike path and how much of a flack that raised. So, the minute we start painting little bikes on the road, I'm sure someone's going to write a letter to the paper and complain about how we're...
Now, the yellow lines on the cliff, which ones do you mean?
Remember when they first built the Cliff Road bike path, there was a yellow line down the middle to divide the path?
Oh, to divide the path.
So the minute we start painting little guys on bikes on Orange Street and some of these other streets, we're gonna get flack about it. The HCC will probably even have a word or two with us about it.
I'm sure we have, maybe we can, I know we've got stencils in-house to do it, but, and that's great.
I think we can overcome those hurdles, Bobby. I hear you.
I don't
That's some
think
flack's worth taking.
So I have no trouble with that. I am personally not in favor of the historic in-town bike path, the blue route.
No, that's part of the reason we're having this discussion tonight, is to look at it one more time.
Not promoting any bike path that is going to take away parking spaces in an area that is predominantly small properties with beautiful, nice little side yards and cut yards, and has always had off-street parking. Because the minute you take away those 11 spaces, I guarantee you we'll have 20 people coming in asking for off-street parking. And I hate to see all these little beautiful yards downtown disappear for people to park their cars in. And some of them don't have room for parking, and where are they supposed to park? I mean, if we're going to take parking away from the street or off the sidewalks, because that's where they've been parking forever, then we need to supply parking for them in return. We can't just say you're not parking here anymore because we don't want you to, without giving them somewhere else to go. So,
well, we 2000, first time I ran, 12 years ago, there were 3 streets in town that were allowed to put one wheel up on the sidewalk, and that was it. That was the policy. That was it was on a piece of paper. That was the deal. I can't remember. It was probably Dover and a couple others. Now it is morphed into parking on the sidewalk everywhere, even in places where you don't need to park on the sidewalk. And when I brought it to the chief's attention that was the policy. Did you know about it? He didn't know about it. It didn't carry through from those days.
So I think at some point, and it's a hard decision, and I understand people don't want to address it, but at some point we have to address it. Are the sidewalks for pedestrians or the sidewalks for cars? And we're going to have that conversation a little further, but I think, and I agree with you on the side yards, et cetera, but I just want to correct that it hasn't always been this way.
Well, they've been parking on Cliff Road since I was a kid, and I grew up in that neighborhood, and there was always cars on that sidewalk. So,
but they used to they used to do the one wheel up, if that. Now they take over the whole thing, and even places bottom part of Center Street across from the restaurant that's there, American Seasons. There's no reason to park on the sidewalk on the left. It's huge there, and they still park and cover the whole
when
sidewalk.
we put the meters in every 30 feet, then they won't be able to get up on the sidewalks.
There we go.
Because we know there's a value to a free space. So,
Bobby,
we could put those horse things. Remember they used to put in to tie the dog.
Oh, yeah.
But then they can't get up on the sidewalk.
Just to address your concerns about people not having a space, this 7 or so spaces recommended by traffic safety on High Street and Pleasant Street. All those properties in front of them have off-street parking currently. That was one of the reasons why that route made the most sense, in addition to other reasons.
But the people that live 4 doors down don't.
Yeah.
Not everybody parks in front of their house. So
I understand that, Bobby, and I respect that. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Just a question on the stenciling. The existing ways to get to the Hummock Pond or Milk Street from downtown without going south or north, are those stenciled? The old Harvey Young path.
Oh, they're signed.
Are there signs?
And there might have been old stencils that have worn off.
Yeah, I think there may have been, but there are signs and stickers on them.
I don't ride them, but are they clear enough so that's the accepted way to go?
There are several signs.
Like it or
and
not,
stickers.
I just want to be sure.
You see the signs,
I
but if the road's stenciled, you see the stencil in the road a lot better than you see a sign.
So I'm just sort of asking, why not stencil there as well, Bob? You don't have to take the parking places away.
Yeah, well, you cut across it up to Fair, and then you dump in on the top of Main Street.
Whatever the accepted way out is, if it's different than the one Toby was working for, that's understandable, Tobias. But let's have one that everybody at least says that's the quasi-official way to get out. It just seems to me that makes sense, but maybe...
Just for the very... Sorry.
I'm worried about it in a different way. I'm concerned with us. There are many side streets in and out of town that you can choose. I'm worried about telling people that have never been here before, that have their kids in one of those little carriers behind them, that this is the safer route when you're clearly sharing any one of these roadways with cars. There's no separate lane that's being created. I think that we could have some multiple ways of, these are ways to go in and out and avoid going the wrong way down one-way streets and so forth. But saying that we as a Board of Selectmen say this is the safer way, I just don't think is something that we can
that's a good point.
Really
say. So you're saying there's no safe way?
So you're really
I
saying
think that there are certain points where you need to get off and walk your bike on the sidewalk if you truly want to keep your kids safe.
So what you're suggesting, though, I think, is that getting out of downtown, there are only, 2 ways then?
Well, no.
I mean, that will mark and call safe. I'm not against that. I just want to understand it.
I just think that there are multiple ways, but you have to recognize on all of these roadways that you're sharing the road with cars.
Yeah, and I think
that it's not a designated separate way to go that's truly protected and safe like a bike path.
And I think that's the beauty of a Shero that's been used in a lot of other cities, and it kind of denotes that it's not a separate lane with a separate line. It's I think that's something very familiar with other folks, and that's something we can also learn as an island. I think it is helpful for people just in a sheer guidance, saying this is a way to get out of town. That's simple enough. It's useful in that regards as well. In the same way we have signs that say to Walwynnet or to Sconset, it's useful.
Yeah. But I think, one of my concerns is sharing Orange Street. Orange Street is usually, if it's a shared road, and there's certain streets and other places that they'll have
cars and walk, everyone will share the road and you understand it. That means you're driving at 20 miles an hour. You're not driving at 40. And it's delineated and it's clear. And it's usually a small road in a, sort of historic area. It's not necessarily Orange Street. And I think Orange Street myself, I think it should have a lane on it. I think there's room, if we examine it, I'd love to, maybe this year we share it, but next year there should be a striped lane. The lane stays clear. You park between the sidewalk and the first stripe on the lane, and that's where you park, and bikes use it, and then people see there's a bike lane. Because when I was in San Diego a few days ago, it's a city with bike lanes through it. But people are careful because there's a bike lane there.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure they're going to be careful because there's a bike guy, blue bike guy painted on the road.
Yeah.
I think it's good. So we have to.
That's a good distinction, Matt.
Yeah, I think we have to. We have to realize that some of these roads are going. If we're going to really share them that way and keep the parking on them for the neighbors, then those roads have to be delineated some way that they are a shared street and it's a 20 or 30 mile hour. In places that's appropriate, I like Huzzy and Quince. If we're going to keep the parking there, then we may have to take the sidewalks off on one side to allow the parking and make those roads actually look like a shared road that you're allowed to, that people can walk right down the middle of or bike right down the middle. And that's, that's a little further than we've gone, I think. But, that's, I think, where we're heading. If we want to make it safe, we need to change things substantially in the next few years. Tweaking around the edges, and I think a lot that we've done is amazing and it's really good. But I think that there's more we have to do, especially downtown.
And I think it's also like it starts us on the process. All these things we have laid out before us. It starts us on the process of examining further, what we'd really like to implement as far as maybe there are some changes in ways of streets, or maybe we create. If you create a one-way, you create parking down the whole side of a street, and then there's your parking spaces that you need created, Bobby. There might be some other ways, but I think this is a step in changing our culture to get us there. And one other thing I just wanted to point out, which is that I think it's really important that we remember that not everybody has a driver's license, and walking isn't the most efficient way. We have a history on the island of cycling 30 years prior to cars, and it's important that people with disability can bike. People who have their license taken away, teenagers who don't currently have a driver's license so they can get in and out safely, elderly folks who've had their license taken away. Maybe they want to get on a trike and bike 5 miles an hour, and if they had a safe way, they'd do it. I just think it's important to keep in mind that there are folks without cars who we should be conscious of. It's not just a safety issue, it's a social justice issue.
All right, well, I think we pretty much covered this. We have some other things on our agenda. Do we have any other questions? Or Ms. Williams?
Linda Williams, chairman of the HDC and bike rider for my entire life. I was against this when it came to the BMAC. I'm the planning commission, and you know that. I'm the planning commission representative to the bike group that was set up by the planning commission. I fought this. I was very disheartened by the fact that it's being promoted again, this in-town thing with wheelie-dealies all over the roads and signs and these green things. I've got the packet. These green signs with the arrows going everywhere. I think we're throwing out the historic nature of Nantucket for a bike. What's bringing people here and what's special about Nantucket is the historic, especially the historic downtown. I'm not talking about bike paths on Tom Nevers Road and Pulpus, and we've done a magnificent job with our bike paths. But planting stencils all over really old roads, as opposed to the little shiny things that are on the posts with arrows going for Cisco, arrows going for Nantucket, which we've always followed. I thought that worked very well. But throwing these green signs with arrows all over the old historic districts and wheelie-dealies all over the roads, blue or white, I don't care what color they are, it's more desecration of the historic district. This is insane. Everything you guys do or plan on doing with bike routes and all this other stuff has to consider the impact, unintended or intended, on the historic nature of the downtown. And the old historic district goes all the way up to Caton Circle. It includes Woodbury, for better or for worse. It goes all the way out past Cumberland Farms. It goes all the way up to, I believe, North Liberty Street where it comes out. And it goes all the way down to the waterfront and down Easton Street. And all this foo-foo stuff that's being proposed in the old historic district with all these signs and painted stuff is insane. And it's a terrible impact on the old historic district. I think you need to think about this. I agree with Dawn when she said there are multiple ways in and out of town. Matt and I and Bobby grew up on the cliff for the most part, and we rode our bikes anywhere and took any route we wanted to take. I mean, this is nuts.
And our kids can't do that anymore.
Mine take the bike paths. Where I live, I get bike paths all the way to town.
But my point is that you can't safely send your kids anymore.
No, and my kids have been blown off their bikes on on South Shore Road.
Yeah.
The problem is you have to consider the unintended consequences of a negative impact on the visual and historic character of the old historic district.
And I really wish they did. And
they haven't asked the HTC for any opinions. They put up bike racks that are horrendous. Not historic at all, in front of the oldest building downtown that was reconstructed first after the 1846 fire. They got this ridiculous stuff planted in front of the Athenaeum. In 1846, the first building reconstructed was the Athenaeum. And we got these things and these round black things for bike racks all over town that have desecrated the historic nature of downtown. We have to think about painting curb cuts blue, like on that little street that goes down to the Stop and Shop. You got to think about all this stuff. It's not necessary to desecrate what makes Nantucket special. And I wish they would have worked with the HDC. No one's asked our opinion about anything. They just throw it in there. That's wrong. And then as far as improving sidewalks, which I expect you'll get to or have gotten to, we don't oppose fixing the sidewalks. That's for darn sure, because they're going up and down hill and in and out of everything. What we oppose is using inappropriate brick. We've seen the damage that did to Upper Main Street on the right. They never replaced the brick as they said they were going to do, and that brick is falling apart.
You're talking about in front of the drugstores?
Yeah.
That's the safest sidewalk in town.
It is, because it was reset.
Because
However,
it was
reset.
Bricks that were actually flat and square.
However, they've acknowledged that those bricks are falling apart, Bobby.
I'm going to stop you
They're
here
falling
because
apart.
this is not a public debate.
I know
this
it's
is
not.
a workshop, and I let you up despite
Right.
that I normally don't let people
Yeah.
talk during a workshop. Now you're gone off into one of your
Well, I just
little
want to make sure
tangents,
anything
so
done
I'm going
is
to please
good.
ask you to sit down. I got
Anything
you.
done,
We got it.
ask
We
the
got it.
HDC for an
All right.
opinion instead of ignoring it.
We don't need to ask you for every permission to do everything in town. Unbeknownst to what you might think, we can get by without you and the HDC. We can make certain decisions on our own. Thank you. All right. Anything else on the bike path?
I guess just in response, Bobby, I would love it if we could turn back in time to 1917.
We all would.
Before we had cars.
We would have cut the roads 40 foot wide and moved the houses, and we would have been great.
And I actually do agree with Linda, which is why I think a bike lane is better than a little doohickeys. But that's,
All right. I'm going to move this on to the next item on our.
Bobby,
workshop.
can we vote on this? Or?
Vote on what?
No, we don't.
We haven't really. We usually
No
don't take action in a. We can. What do we? First of all, what do you want to vote on? Because I still don't know what we're voting on. Are we voting on stenciling the road?
I think in my mind, just the consensus of the board would be, a line on Orange Street, mark the current path that exists down Pleasant or Jefferson, whatever, and then I'd like to vote on the historic bike route and the elimination of those 7 parking spaces as recommended by traffic safety.
Sorry, can you repeat what you want to vote on?
We're going to vote on them one at a time.
I thought, I didn't think we were going to be voting in a workshop.
No, we're going to put 3 items. I want to make sure they're separate. We'll put it on an agenda.
Put it on an agenda. Okay, right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't vote in workshops.
Oh, thank you, Bobby.
So it's 3 items. It's
Putting a bike lane on Orange Street?
On Orange Street, stenciling the current route that's laid out, and
Which route?
I don't know, the in-town bike
There's
path
2 or
route.
3 of them.
There's a couple of them. There's little signs, but they're not clearly marked.
I think I think according to our packet, they're planning to have that done. Correct, Mike?
Yeah.
The stenciling of the existing routes. That's planned for this summer.
Correct. And the ones that have been approved, the proposed routes that have been approved are included in the plan as well.
And the Orange Street, the Shero on Orange Street is already planned for this summer. Is that correct?
Correct. That was one of the identified proposed routes that we would
Will you
stencil.
bring us what that looks like when we have the meeting?
What the stencil looks like, or what?
What it's going to look like on the street when we have the meeting, so we can make sure we don't desecrate.
I'll have to work with DPW on that. I'm really dependent on.
Yeah, but bring
they
that
own
in
it.
because
I mean,
we want to
that's-
make sure we don't desecrate the historic roadways.
I don't. We can bring it in for show and tell.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, and then the third item is a vote on the historic in-town bike route. And I just want to make very clear that if this does get a positive vote, it goes into the capital queue. It just doesn't materialize to happen this year. It goes into the capital program, and it gets vetted by capital and put into our long-term capital plan.
And I think, Bobby, when we get to that, that can be your motion. I would like to have it done this year. And we can talk about that at a future time. But that's, I
Well,
think
we
it's
haven't even approved it yet, so.
Yeah,
Anyways.
I just think it's important that we try to do something for this.
We'll put it on the agenda for some time in the next week's pretty tied up, so Libby and I will look at it and figure it out.
Thank you, Bobby.
And in regards to all of this, the only other thing I think, and this isn't for tonight, the only other thing we need to talk about, I think, is the bike paths themselves are unsafe. Right now, how do I say this? Cars don't respect that it's a traveled way, and they drive right into it without looking. And bikers don't respect the travel way, and they go blasting across roads that they have because we have so many signs, it's a nuisance. So they ignore the ones they really shouldn't ignore, and at some point we need to tackle this because I'll tell my wife was almost killed this past summer, and she's going 15 miles an hour on a bike path, and a car went right into her, and she yelled at the guy, and he wasn't even looking. So if you bike every day, once or twice a summer, you're almost killed, and you're on the bike path. And that's only getting worse. Everyone that bikes every day, it's getting worse and worse.
We must live in a combat zone because you make it sound like you can't drive out of your house and run 100 feet down the bike path without getting run over by a car. I got to tell you, I ride a bike every day, Matt, in the summer. And I got to tell you, I live on one of the busiest bike paths on the road, on the island. I live on the Milestone Bike Path. And I guarantee you, if I sit there for 3 hours at that stop sign, at the end of my road, not one biker stops. So I would bet you big money that the majority of these people that are hit by cars is because they weren't abiding the laws. They ride up one-way streets the wrong way. They cut in and out of cars. They never stop at the stop signs. I mean,
if there's a way to improve it, Bobby,
people have accidents with bikes, but people have accidents with cars. People have accidents walking across the street. How many people fall in the damn cobblestones and hurt themselves because the sidewalks aren't? I mean, we're beating this horse to death here.
I don't, and I disagree with you on that. I don't think we are, and I think that if you talk to the hospital and talk to the ER at the end of August, and talk to, which I did when Sheila went in, and the stories they started telling me about people, hit by box, one of it was, on Prospect Street, flown off, medevaced off, hit by the mirror of a box truck. Guy kept driving, didn't even know he hit her. The person was medevaced off with serious head injuries. They had a whole list, and that was just one story of 3 or 4 they were telling me. I think it is a lot worse than we remember. You might be fortunate, at the hours you go or where you go, but it's pretty dangerous. And
Maybe
I think
the solution
there are little ways
ban bikes from some of these roads. Then
I think this.
Because
No, I
if
think
we
that
can't share them with the cars, then the bikes should stay off. These should be for vehicles only.
I agree with you. Prospect is one of them that we might want to do that on, but that we need to continue to have this discussion to solve some of these, and I think, and we should attempt to improve some of these things. But that's I'm one vote, I'm one person.
All right, so we'll put that on the agenda, those 3 items, for the near future. Next is an update from the Roads and Right-of-Ways Committee. Alan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board of Selectmen, for taking the time to deal with some of these issues. I know I'm not going to talk about bicycles, even though I'm quite familiar with them myself. And one of the things I've observed, both as a pedestrian, my favorite way to get around is on foot. And a lot of the work of the Roads and Right-of-Way Committee has been on pedestrian access. We're also interested, of course, in public access all over the island. The purpose of the committee, or our mission, is to deal with these issues, to deal with issues of the status of public access over public and private roads. We do this in a number of ways. Over the years, we've taken on several projects that deal with various aspects of obtaining public access and public rights-of-way throughout the island. We're concerned mainly with access to the water. We're concerned with, well, most recently with sidewalks, and I'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. Let me get to public access, Erica, if you could just flash that up there. Some of the projects that we've done over the years. The Founders Burial Ground is an interesting illustration of some of the work that has been done by the Roads and Right-of-Way Committee. The Founders Burial Ground, of course, is where the original settlers are buried, or many of the original settlers are buried. A number of years ago, the property surrounding it was sold and divided into house lots. It ended up there was no public access to the Founders Burial Ground. There was an easement that went from Cliff Road across the property, but there was a very deep valley and so on. It was basically an unusable access. The Roads and Right-of-Way Committee worked for several years, actually, with the planning director to secure access to the Founders Burial Ground by negotiating an easement with the Land Bank and the Anglers Club to provide access to the Founders Burial Ground. That's the type of projects that the Roads and Right-of-Way Committee has looked at over the years. Where are areas, whether it's to the beach, whether it's to the ponds, whether it's to different public lands across the island, or private properties such as Land Bank and Conservation Foundation, other conservation properties that are open to the public. We look for access to these different areas. Steps Beach is another project. For many years, everyone thought that the town owned the way Indian Avenue from Lincoln Circle down to the beach at Steps. And as it turned out, it was not a public way, even though the town had built and maintained those stairs for over 20 years. The Right-of-Way Committee got involved, again, working with the planning office to negotiate an easement down Indian Avenue and a subsequent license agreement with property owners on both sides of the path going down. It's also
former Selectman Chadwick. I think he had a lot of interest in that project and helped to move it along.
No, absolutely. In fact, you may remember that the Roads and Right-of-Way Committee had a selectman member designated as that's how we got up to 9 members on our committee. Brian indeed was very involved with that. In fact, many of the directives have come from the Board of Selectmen. For example, the encroachment policy I'll mention in just a moment, that was a request from the town manager to the Roads and Right-of-Way Committee to help assemble and the encroachment policy that's been adopted. We've also worked with the planning office on the One Big Beach easements at Surfside. We were involved. In fact, there was a memo back in 2006 from the committee supporting the One Big Beach easements for the Surfside 6. You may remember that experience. From that, we've learned a tremendous amount, and the One Big Beach program, and Matt was directly involved in that back a number of years ago, and that program was introduced. That program has really expanded to be I would say, a major success in terms of providing public access to the beaches around the island. We see that certainly at Eel Point, where we picked up, I believe, nearly half a mile of beach at Eel Point, where, at Dionis, where we picked up other properties around the island, Matagasham, for example, in addition to the Surfside takings and so on. We also work with the DPW director as far as developing a potential takings list. We used to call it a priority takings list until we realized that as a committee, the Roads and Right-of-Way Committee has no power. We don't take anything. Our only power is to make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, County Commissioners. And it is through the quality of the work that we bring to you for our recommendations that we act. We have no power ourselves to do any of this stuff. We do work with the DPW director, though, in terms of reviewing the potential private roads that that should be taken. And we have a criteria, they're in your packet. There are 7 different criteria that we use when we're looking at these private roads before the recommendations are developed with the DPW director. Now, it really is, of course, the DPW that is responsible for the takings, but we do work with them as far as making recommendations based on the matrix that we've developed for the road takings. One of the projects that I'm most proud of, I guess, as far as what are the achievements of the Roads and Right-of-Way Committee, is the project that we've taken on as far as placing the granite public way monuments around the island. This project began 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago. The years seem to go by pretty quickly. And over that time, we have currently in place 36 upright and flush granite public way monuments that we've installed. Now, this is in addition to a number of concrete monuments that were placed during the 50s and then later during the 70s. And you've probably seen some of those around. By the way, all of these monuments are listed on our website, the Roads and Right-of-Way Committee website, or it's on the town's website, but under the Roads and Right-of-Way section. And what we've done with each of the public way monuments that we have located, you'll find a photograph, you'll find the longitude and latitude, you'll find a specific reference to it, and all of this material is available to the public, available on our website. And we're continuing that program. We have on order 5 additional granite public way monuments that we'll be placing 3 additional ones along Baxter Road to mark the lateral ways to the footpath. We're still waiting for, I believe, 1, possibly 2 more of those ways, the taking process to be complete. When those are complete, those will be marked as well. We have also marked the beginning of the Sconset footpath and the end, I shouldn't say we have, but we have been involved with the creation of new signage at both the beginning and the end of the Sconset footpath. At the beginning of the footpath, there's a poem that reflects the path. And then we have marked the lateral ways there. When the ways along Hobart Avenue are taken, those ways will also be marked with the granite public way monuments. 2 of those ways are already complete. Willard Street and one of the other ones have already been taken. Those public way monuments are on order. So those are some of the public access projects that we're continuing to work on and have been working on. Erica, the next slide. This is Founders Burial Ground. The Roads and Right-of-Way Committee was looking for some way to commemorate, I guess, the achievement, because the committee felt this was an important achievement, getting access to the Founders Burial Ground. Again, this is an important historical site as we saw it. And so once we rededicated the cemetery, provided the access through the easement that we helped negotiate, we decided to create a women's monument at the Founders Burial Ground, and that's what you see here. Again, it's if you haven't been up to see it, it's really quite a lovely monument. We duplicated exactly the size, the shape of the existing men's monument that was placed in 1881. And we did it in 2009 as a commemoration of the 350th anniversary of the settlement of Nantucket by European settlers. Erica? Okay, yeah, this is Steps Beach. This is an example of the public way monuments that we use. Again, these are granite monuments. We wanted something, initially, we were going to use concrete. That was the plan. We were going to duplicate the ones that were planted or that were installed in the 50s and 70s. And the problem with the concrete ones is that they just don't hold up. They eventually rust out. Many of the old ones that we found, we have photographs of on our website. You'll see that the rebar is sticking out and so on. So that's why we went with the granite ones. Let's see, Erica, next one. This is one of the lateral ways at the end of the Sconset, from Baxter Road over to the footpath. We use a mixture of the upright public way monuments and, where appropriate, the flush ones that are in the ground. And this is an example of one of the flush ones. This is a public way. This is at the end of Maya Comet Road Maya Comet Road as you're going down to the beach there. And again, you can't really see it, but on the left-hand side is the way down to the beach. And the next one is, this is a project where we were asked to assist with the Great Harbor Yacht Club. They had a Chapter 91 issue where they had to provide public access. So there are six of the, there are six flush concrete in the ground and two of these upright wooden ones that indicate the public access and where you can actually walk from 56 Union Street or from, we're right next to the restaurant there, all the way around through the property down to the beach on Washington Street. And our committee was directly involved with the placement of these public access walkways. So some of the other projects, I mentioned the encroachment policy. Again, we were approached by the town manager a couple of years ago to work with the town to help create an encroachment policy. We had Joe Barklinger, who's a surveyor, who's also on our committee, worked and developed an encroachment policy, presented it to the DPW director, and over time that encroachment policy is now in place. It's been endorsed by the Board of Selectmen. The difference with this policy, the old policy didn't have any teeth to it. There was no real enforcement mechanism, and we worked with the DPW director to develop an encroachment policy that does have an enforcement mechanism to it. Again,
and Alan, could you just remind us what the enforcement mechanism is? I recall we were talking about permits wouldn't be issued or something, or what is the mechanism? And to Libby, is it in place now?
I don't recall what it was.
Well, in terms of it being in place, yes, the board did vote, I believe it was some time ago, 6-8 months ago. In terms of the enforcement mechanism, it depends. It depends on we identified three different types of encroachments, basically in terms of how serious they were. The main ones are sight lines, for example, cars pulling up to an intersection, you can't see what's coming, and so on. We felt that this was a danger not just for the car traffic, but also for the bicycles and pedestrians and so on. The enforcement issue there is notice from the, I believe it's the DPW, sends a notice directing the, or pointing out what the encroachment is and giving a time limit. And, oh, Kara, do you want to elaborate on this for us?
When a safety situation is identified, if it's an immediate safety hazard, we can go out and take care of it immediately. If it is something that can be given a period of time, we notify the property owner and give them a period of time to correct that situation. If they don't, we will go in and correct it ourselves. We do have the ability to charge them, but we haven't been utilizing that at this point. We're still trying to get our handle on creating a viable program out of it.
And one of the other things related to this is that Kara is planning to do there's an education component to this as well, to go into a neighborhood where there are encroachments, to either have a flyer go door to door, and just to let people know that what an encroachment is, what our encroachment policy is, and then to follow that up with contact for the specific encroachments and so on.
So it sounds like at this point the enforcement policy is the town will step in and take independent action if the homeowner doesn't do anything. Just to be clear,
yeah,
right?
Essentially.
In effect, we'll do it for you, and
yeah,
we'll
exactly.
bill you if we get around to it, but if we don't, we don't, and then the encroachment is removed.
Correct.
But it sounds like we're focusing on cases of safety. Yes.
Right.
If it's not a safety issue, it's probably not being addressed yet. It's my...
Well, there are other encroachment issues. For example, you'll find pipes, usually drainage pipes or something, that come out into the roadway. There are sometimes people will build walls in the roadway. Things like rocks, for example. People like to put rocks in front of their houses,
right,
even though it's in the roadway.
So sometimes to keep people from parking there.
To keep people
just,
from
just
parking
to take
there.
an example.
Or they plant trees to keep them
right.
from parking.
Or, look, the board dealt with this with Cathcart Road.
Exactly.
Or block public ways.
Or block public ways. So, again, somehow in the back of my mind, I thought there was another step in this that might involve something more severe. But if we're getting done what we need to get done with this policy, that's fine. We have to, it might be interesting at some point to identify the actions we've had to take by address versus those that we all know exist where we probably haven't asserted our rights yet, right? I mean, I think there's some of those out there.
There are some, but generally what's happened is that once people are notified, people seem to be taking care of most of these. For example, there were some rocks on Cliff Road. This was maybe a year or so ago, and those were brought to Roads and Right-of-Way attention, to the DPW attention, and a week later those rocks were removed. So, it seems to be working, and like anything else, it's educating people about the importance of encroachments and the fact that a lot of people don't realize that the roadway is different than the road, that the town owns the way, not just the road. And so there is an education component to that
Thanks.
as well.
Just wanted to follow up.
Alan, just in regards to kind of the ways, has your committee looked into any of the encroachments from revetment projects along Monomoy and Shimo, where the public can't walk by at between the low and high watermark?
I'm just trying. No, I don't recall any specific ones that we've dealt with. Is there a particular one you have in mind?
There's a number of them. I'm just curious if that's something you've looked at, because I know in the past people did used to walk along the beach, and now if it's high tide, you can't. You kind of have to go into the water. Or
well,
there's also like rocks along Wye.
Are they on property?
No, like the high tide is come up to a point where you can't pass in the high and low water mark.
There are usually those areas. There are groins. There are breakwaters. There are all sorts of construction projects. I walk a significant portion of the beach every summer, and I'm pretty much familiar with all of the different types of projects and encroachments and so on that happen, particularly along the North Shore. I walk the stretch from basically Children's Beach out to Tordio Point a couple of times a summer, and it's pretty amazing what happens out there. There's not a lot you can do with the rock revetment, for example, at the end of, out on the North Shore there. That's there. Those groins that are there, the other structures that are there, those apparently they must have at some point been licensed or approved. So,
well, just we're talking about encroachments, and it's just something I know there's a couple spots out in Shimo. If you walk past kind of the second pier out there, the private pier, and you keep walking down further, you just can't go anymore. It's revetments in the way. So just these things drift away in other ways, not just vegetation.
Well, sometimes you do have to climb over them. You do have to climb over. As I say, I've circumnavigated the island myself in sections, the whole thing, and there are definitely some places where it is a challenge. Let's put it that way, to get over different obstructions. But most of those are licensed.
North Shore, some on the North Shore have been 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah,
a couple that you have to hop over.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe even longer. Yeah, they've been there.
Yeah, no. It's just something I think we should be aware of, just trying to make it easier for people to pass, as the Concom's approving things.
Well, as
we want to be all working together and on the same page.
I don't know. I'm not sure that are they still approving things that stick across? I
No.
don't think they are.
No.
I think a lot of what you're talking about has been there for 50
Oh yeah,
years.
yeah, but there has been projects over the last 5 years where they've renewed their
repair what's existing.
right repair.
They can't put anything new.
Right, but so they're in those repairs though, where the permit is pulled again and reassessed, and I think that's just something we should be on the same page as the roads and right of way and the Board of Selectmen and the Concom, making sure we maintain steps over those revetments, to maintain the access.
Well, now that you raise another interesting point there. Washington Street, for example, as you go along the beach at Washington Street, one of the projects that the board, actually this was back in 2007, 8, 9, developed was a harbor walk project. That project, we mentioned that in our roads, there's a right-of-way improvement plan that we did back in 2008, presented to the board and so on, and that includes reference to a harbor walk. Ultimately, the harbor walk goes from Brant Point all the way down to the land bank property at near Otis, near the creeks down there. And that's one of these long-range projects because there are all sorts of pieces. There are a couple of pieces that are missing and so on. But as you go along Washington Street, along the beach, there are a couple of places where, in fact, there should be some stairs over the, to get over the dock or to the whatever's in the way there. And that comes under the Chapter 91 license things, which one of the other things that Roads and Right of Way has done in the past is dealt with the Chapter 91 license issues. For example, the footpath that goes around the Great Harbor Yacht Club. As I said, we were directly involved with the placement of those there. So, other projects that we've been involved with, bike route connections that Mike was talking about earlier. We have recommended, you may remember we came to the board back in, I think it was 2009, with a proposal to turn Saratoga's, make it one way the other direction, and we were working, now the plan is to do Wynn Street and up over Mill Hill. There have been a number of different connections that have been proposed over the years, and now that those are, like many projects, it takes a while for these things to materialize, for the funding, for the planning, to get agreement, that sort of thing. So we're very much interested in connecting the three major bike paths: Surfside, Nantucket, and the new Hummock Pond bike path coming in from the west side. We're very much in favor of the in-town bike route going over the railroad bed and so on. That's been a project that our committee's worked on since 2005. So there are other bike route connections like that. Cliff Road is another one, but that, as you were discussing earlier, is that's a tough one. When I'm riding a bike that way, I go down Darrymore over to Liberty and so on. I think anyone who rides a bike on a regular basis knows where the back roads are to avoid the traffic, and it's hard to. Well, anyway, that's a whole different subject. Island trail systems. One of the things that we have done is we've mapped out the trail systems around the island. Most of the trails are on private property, either mostly conservation property. The Land Bank, the Conservation Foundation, and Mass Audubon all publish maps of the trail systems that are on their property. We've combined those. There is a map again on our website. This was part of the right-of-way improvement plan that we did that shows where these trail systems are. One of the trail projects that we're working on currently is the railroad bed. As you know, the railroad went from Straight Wharf to first Surfside, then along the beach to Sconset. That didn't work out so well because of the changing summer beach and winter beach and all that sort of thing. So they rerouted it out across the middle of the island over to Tom Nevers and then down to the beach at Sconset. Our committee we have a map of the railroad route. We have purchased from the state office the name so we can use that Nantucket Central Railroad, and we're in the process of developing a path. This is in cooperation with the property owners along the way. So that's a work in progress. And we've also worked with the planning director on the open space plan update. That will include maps of some of these trail systems that we've been working on. And we use part of a CPEA grant that we have to partially fund the open space plan update. So those are some of the projects that we've been working on. And Erica, is there another? Oh, downtown sidewalk. This is the last piece here. The downtown sidewalk survey is our most recent project. This came about because back in 2011, when there was a lot of sewer work that was going on in town, sidewalks would be disturbed for sewers and so on. The Roads and Right-of-Way Committee was asked to work with there was a sidewalk group that sort of had existed earlier. So we worked again as that sewer work was underway, to make recommendations regarding the sidewalks and the curbs and that sort of thing. When we were doing that, members of the committee said, boy, the sidewalks in the downtown area need some attention. And so we undertook a sidewalk survey, and again, you have in your packet a more detailed outline of what we have done there. Basically, we took a map of the downtown. We looked at every sidewalk, every street that had sidewalks on it. We went up and down both sides of the street, and we marked the condition of the sidewalks by street number up and down the street. we had a total of, I think there were 600 and some street addresses and so on. We compiled all that data. We had a 5-point scale that we were using in terms of a number. One sidewalk, say, would have been the north side of Main Street, the one that was referred to a little while ago, which we considered number 1 sidewalk. That's the upper portion on the north side of Main Street. Nice and level, smooth, it has all the conditions. And there, we were surprised to find that there are actually a number of sidewalks that are in pretty good shape. But we also found that there are a number of sidewalks in the downtown area that definitely need some attention. They're wavy, tree roots, all these sort of things. There hasn't been a lot of maintenance that has been put into these sidewalks for a number of years. This has now been, we're working on this now. The DPW has in the capital program budget, of course that needs to be approved by the Finance Committee and so on, but there is an allotment now of money, and I think Mike mentioned this in his report as well, to do some work on the downtown sidewalks. Our goal was, again, the public access part of it, particularly with the new downtown cultural district that is being planned. All the references, of course, are to a walkable downtown cultural district. And I'm sure you know where, the places and the route and the boundaries and all that sort of thing. So anyway, what we've done is provided this data to the DPW and to develop a plan for working on some of the sidewalk issues that are extant in town. For example, we took some of the areas can be done by the DPW, and we've worked with Kara to identify which areas those are. There are other areas of sidewalk that are much bigger, more comprehensive. These will need, we figure, to be contracted out, and that's where the capital program monies come in. So what I've done in your packet, you'll find a more detailed description of the downtown sidewalk project, and so I guess that's pretty much it. That's what we've been doing. The two things that we really emphasize are public access and trying to make it comfortable for people to get around, whether it's in cars, whether it's on, using the public ways around the island. That's been our focus. So I'll be happy to take any questions you have.
Board members?
Just one quick one, I guess, and I did read the sidewalk plan and all that. If we do spend, substantial money, $10, $12 million to fix them, how do we ensure that once they're fixed, they remain fixed? The sidewalks. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Yes. Well, yeah.
You mean by cars, for example?
I'm not blaming cars. I don't want Bobby yelling at me.
Just one comment.
One of the things we did in our sidewalk survey, and we do address the issue of parking on the sidewalks, we basically don't consider those sidewalks to be accessible. Certainly they're not handicapped accessible. They're very difficult to walk on as well, and very often you find people walking in the streets. One of the things we want to emphasize, there are a couple of gaps. You talked earlier about Prospect Street, where people come off the end of the multi-use path there, and then they're basically dumped into the street. Now, there is enough room for a sidewalk to take from the end of the multi-use path all the way down to Milk Street. Mike Burns and I walked that with Leo Azarian, who was the surveyor who laid that out. So we know that there is room for we're talking strictly a sidewalk there. Right. Again, that intersection has been near the top of our list of recommendations. Something needs to be done for that since 2008. The other one, of course, is Quaker Road. When people come off the end at Caton Circle there, and the kids, parents with the kids in strollers, parents with the kids on bikes and back, and that sort of thing. So one of the recommendations we've made there is the Wind Street path, which was indicated in Mike's presentation earlier.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's a question, but my own sense, and I don't know how the other board members feels, is that exploring additional and new public access ways to the water, whether they're publicly owned or privately owned, it might involve some discussions, or might even involve some takings at some point, is I think an important activity. So I'm not quite sure how to get at that, whether we ask for a recommended list, or here are 5 ideas or 10, you know what I mean, to keep that moving forward. I understand Steps Beach and Holbert Avenue. I'm alert to how we revisited Holbert Avenue after the word was, oh, we lost them. Well, if we lost them, we got them back. And I think there might be lots of other places where public access could be achieved. So anyway, that's my thought in terms of asking you to take another look at that. On the North Shore, wherever it may be.
Exactly, yeah. I would say that, let me address that very specifically. When we were looking at places for public access, this was one of the early projects, and we were looking for the ways to the water. Mm-hmm. That's where we came up with the idea that these ways should be marked. We found the concrete posts and so on. So that was some of the early work that we did. You remember in the right-of-way improvement plan back in 2008, that was the main focus, finding the ways to the water, and then working through the Surfside 6 takings, the One Big Beach takings there, and then later the ones along the North Shore, at Dionis, and a little further down the way there, same at Madikesham and so on. We have literally gone around the island looking where the ways are, whether the public or private ways. Now, most of the feedback we get is along the North Shore from Monomoy down toward the field station, the UMass field station. Once you go down Cathcart Road, that's pretty much the only access in the harbor. Now, Cathcart Road, as you very well know, is a very narrow, one-lane, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of it, the land bank owns the property. The land bank just expanded the parking lot down there, but still, you can only get maybe 8 or 10 cars at most in that area. We've looked at the other ways. There's a private way that goes down off of Shimau Road, and then there are a couple of other private ways. There's one down Fulling Mill Road, both of which in the I would say years ago, people assumed that those were public, and of course they aren't public. They're all private ways down there. What Roads and Right-of-Way has done, we've identified where the ways are, whether they're public or private ways. The first thing we wanted to do was to mark the public ways, and that's where and that's what we've been doing. Most of those ways to the beach are footpaths, pedestrian access that goes down. I don't believe that there are other ways other than, unless you want to take the private property at Fulling Mill or Shimau Pond. I think those would be very expensive takings, and you have to deal with the parking as well. You have to deal with the access. The problem at Cathcart Road. And I think that some of those other ones you would be inviting a similar problem to. I would say, though, that if there is any access, particularly access to the water, whether it's to the beachfront or to the ponds, that's something we'd be very much interested in supporting. If the Board of Selectmen is willing to take on.
So do you have a list of those other ways that are private that we can at least review? You mentioned two of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that would be good.
Yeah, and there are other ones. By the way, as far as access along the South Shore, I'm sure you're aware that the Conservation Foundation, the Land Bank, and so on own miles of beaches, all of which have public access and parking areas and so on along the South Shore. Land Bank is working on, the Land Bank has substantial holdings along the west end of the island from Smooth Hummocks all the way out toward Nantucket. There are some pretty substantial holdings out there, beach holdings. We're working on acquiring some other beach holdings out there, and of course the Conservation Foundation owns substantial beachfront out that way. So I don't think that there's access issues along the South Shore that we're aware of. The main areas are along that one stretch from Monomoy to the field station and beyond. By the way, once you get out to Quays, there is a public access at Quays. The Land Bank has property there, and then around the harbor is a little, again, there's not a lot of access because there just aren't the ways there.
Thanks.
Alan, who do you take your directives from? Do you guys just sit as a committee and decide this is where we're going to move forward on, or?
Well, I wouldn't put it quite that way. Over the years, one of the things in preparing for this little update tonight, I went back over our annual reports for the last since 2006, and I was frankly amazed at some of the projects that we've done over the years. Most of these projects come from the committee itself. We're always looking for public access issues. Where can we get the public? What are some of the issues as far as public access? As I say, the sidewalks, which are something our committee considers to be a public access issue. We said, look, we can do better than this. Nantucket, it's historic, all the sort of thing. We have thousands and thousands of tourists who like to walk around downtown. We can do better with the sidewalks. So that sort of came out of our, again, out of the committee itself. So I would say most of the projects that I've covered here, plus many of the other ones that we've done, have been self-generated, but they all come from our mission statement, our purpose of providing public access, making recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, county commissioners, in terms of issues with public access.
I have one item that I would like your committee to explore in the next few months. And,
absolutely.
It is the Chapter 91 licenses for us right now, in particular, the downtown waterfront. I think there's several down there between Steamboat Wharf and the town pier. You know, there's a lot of changes going on down there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new, bigger boat coming, and it's going to require a new offloading system. And I know that there's a lot of things in that Chapter 91 license when it pertains to public access and public restrooms and all different types of things, and it's something that we don't have time to look into.
Mm-hmm.
That I would hope in your committee would dig into it a little bit and see if some of the things that are happening or have had happened in the last few years could possibly trigger a change to that 91 license, because this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. Welk Square was eventually going to happen. That electric company property is going to be developed, and they all have Chapter 91 licenses
exactly.
all the way along there. And we just don't have time, quite frankly, to really dig into them.
All right. Thank you for the suggestion.
Great
I would say that that's something that our committee is very much interested in. As you probably are aware, the NIR has marked Harbor Walk. You know, you go down, you see the wooden signs for Harbor Walk. This way you can walk along Candle, New Wales Street, and down to the beach, and they've done a good job of marking it. Same with the Yacht Club when the new Great Harbor Yacht Club was put in. we, as I say, we're directly involved with the placement of those public way signs around there. It is something we're interested in. We're usually notified. Usually Andrew will notify us if there's a Chapter 91 license coming up for renewal. For example, currently there are 2 along Easton Street from the from Brant Point or from the Coast Guard station down that are people have applied for some work. That means that Chapter 91 is involved, and we have been notified of that, so we go down to take a look at what the situation
I'm really
is.
curious as to what triggers a change in the license. You know, it would.
Anytime there's work to be done. For example, the land bank just purchased the property at 27 Easy Street. One of the things that the land bank considered before purchasing the property is what are the Chapter 91 implications for the, you know, what we're responsible for. We also have a building there that already had a demolition permit to it, and you know, so there are several things. But generally, if there's any work that is being done on the property, there's a property down at the other end of Washington Street that has a Chapter 91 issue. There are several other places where they're doing work, some work on a bulkhead or whatever. Anytime there's any work, that will require a Chapter 91 filing.
I would, you know, I know there's a lot of them around the island. I mean, more than I probably even know of.
Mhm.
You know, and it would be nice if we had some either electronic or paper system that if somebody wanted to go review a license, they could at least see the license. Because right now they're without calling council or having
Exactly.
Libby and staff dig one of these things up, if we wanted to look at a license, it's not something we can just put our hands on.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so difficult to track these down. You either have to be notified because there's work being done, but to find where the existing conditions are. For example, there are signs along Easton Street. Behind the White Elephant, for example, you'll see a little discrete sign that says public access and so on. There is public access all the way down to the Coast Guard station, but there are a couple of places where you have to jump down off the bulkhead onto the beach and climb back up and so on. As far as where those licenses are kept, my understanding is it's up in Boston, but Andrew is probably a better source of where that.
I think the Harbor Plan Implementation Committee
Yes.
back in its time
Correct.
Tried to put together a list, Bobby. So I'm pretty sure there's an Excel spreadsheet someplace. Natural Resources may have it, maybe Andrew does.
Jeff has some of them. They are not issued by the town, obviously, so
Right.
we don't really maintain an inventory of them. They can be sometimes a little time-consuming to obtain. I have spoken on a not regular, but every now and then basis with DEP about them. We get notified, these ones on Easton Street that you're talking about, if they're the ones from last spring, we looked into them and
Right.
Determined that there wasn't really a public benefit that was going to be compromised. And whenever we do get a notice, we review it and check into it. We'd be happy to include you on that, in that loop.
Yeah, I think it sounds like, for example, the Chapter 91 thing, to the extent you review them, it would be helpful to, I think, to the board to know when that review takes place, what notice comes in. It wouldn't be very hard to keep us in the loop, Bobby?
Some of these.
I'm sorry, we are in the loop. The town gets a notification from DEP whenever there is a Chapter 91 license that has something to do with whenever there's a Chapter 91 license change being proposed. And we look into it, and if it's something that we think the board should get involved in, it would be brought to your attention. Sometimes the changes are not expeditious in happening. They take quite a while, and when I've called DEP about various Chapter 91 things, I'm generally told we have hardly any staff, so it's going to take a very long time to get whatever it is that you're looking for. It would be great if the Right-of-Way Committee could take on the task of inventorying them and identifying all major public benefit conditions.
Right. Because some of them
That's
aren't just public access. There are public restrooms, there's fueling facilities, there's marine-related industry businesses that have to be there. There's a lot of things. I mean, there's a Chapter 91 license, if I'm correct, if my memory serves me right, for the Dreamland that they have to have the bathroom open to the public.
Right, and they do.
I'm sure the boat basin has the same thing, but we don't know what those are, how many bathrooms, how many hours, and it'd be nice to be able to have somewhere to go and say, hey, take the lock off that thing because it's part of your Chapter 91 license, but we don't really know what their license reads right now, so it's hard to do.
Well, I mean, we can certainly obtain that. Natural Resources did undertake something of a project to do this a few years ago, but it quickly got overtaken by actual other,
Right. Right, and that's why I was thought that maybe it might be a nice fit for your committee because you have some experience in them before, and we start on them, and then we run off to the next more crazy fire.
Yeah, and I just think more frequent communication like this, Alan, to coordinate the projects so that the projects we might have interest in are the same ones you would have interest in. You know what I mean? So not that what you're doing doesn't have interest, but if there's something like this that, other than this conversation, we might never have interjected it. So I think we need to work on that kind of communication a little better.
Good. Yeah, we're always open to ideas, particularly if it deals with public access, and of course if it comes from the Board of Selectmen, we're always interested in it. We did work with the Harbor
Plan Implementation Committee
group, and that came off of whatever the Harbor Plan group was, and then the implementation group was the Chapter 91, and that's where we did we worked with the chairman of that committee, and this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago when we were doing some of that work. But I agree with you. I think that that is really a key. As we see nowadays, as the price of land goes up, we know that it's, people don't like to, if they're spending millions of dollars on houses, they don't want to have the riffraff there. And it's important to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and we're the riffraff.
Yeah. Well, anybody who doesn't...
Rick, you're raft.
Yeah, unless you're invited onto the property. So.
And just to reiterate or follow up, I was just kind of reading through the Chapter 90 requirements and authorization. They're talking about structures and tidalways, and says placement or construction of any structure regardless of size, whether permanent or seasonal. Examples of typical structures include but are not limited to piers, wharfs, dams, seawalls, weirs, booms, breakwaters, bulkheads, ripraps, revetments, jetties, peels, piers, groins, all require a license. So just something for us to keep in mind, just reading off their website. Maybe I'm not reading the detailed lawyer's version, but... No,
you're absolutely correct. And of course, remember the chapter where this comes from goes back to the 1630s when, Massachusetts, and of course we included Maine at the time, was a colony. And they were trying to get development on the shoreline. They wanted to have people building docks and so on. And it wasn't until later that they realized, well, the public has some rights too, and that's where the Chapter 91 comes from.
Yeah, it says here on the website, the colonial ordinances codified the public trust doctrine, a legal principle that dates back nearly 2,000 years.
Yeah. But we differ from the state of Mass in the public trust document because we were not part of Mass when Mass adopted it. We were part of New York. So when we came in from New York, we came in under the existing rules that we had. Correct. And our rules were such that we had, we set off a rod to the ponds and and the beaches and everything else. So we were not part of Massachusetts. We are not bound by those. Now, a lot of the lawyers and everybody else claims that we aren't, but we are different. And I think that's, when we go to do, and some of that has to be remembered. When we go to do takings, like you said with the roads, it'll be really expensive. Well, it might be, but at the same time, it might behoove the owners to donate that because they can get more tax benefit. We're going to take, if we decide we're going to take something, we're going to take it anyway. We're going to price it based on our historical precedent, historical use, etc. And we're going to take it anyhow. If they actually in turn donate it or donate an easement, they can put a large number on that. It's justifiable. So there is a way to it's part of the whole idea of One Big Beach. Is to work cooperatively to obtain something that, we could obtain it another way, but cooperatively the owners themselves make out better. And so I think part of this is educational, so that they, they get shamed into it because they understand what Nantucket is about and how we viewed it, and B, they have a huge benefit from it. So I think there's, you sort of have a carrot and a stick, which I think we need to promote more and explain.
Well, I'll definitely be sure that Roads and Right-of-Way Committee takes a look at whatever we can as far as Chapter 91, and also in terms of any other potential access to the water, because I say those are at the top of our list as far as public access.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks.
All right.
Great.
Thank you,
Well,
Alan.
thank you. It's been a very interesting evening, both Mike's presentation and this. So thank you for the time.
All right, Brian, you are up. Sewer projects cost update.
I love all this public trust doctrine discussion.
It's very fascinating. It's interesting. I'd like to know more about that history, Matt. That's be something that our town council should, maybe look into.
Have a box.
Yeah.
Or unless I give it to you. But I have a
You
box.
gave me a box of something.
So I may not have a box. I may have offloaded it.
We'll
Yeah.
have to look for that.
But that's all interesting points. But I know of us as living in Massachusetts. So, Brian,
Good evening.
sewer.
Sewer. Everybody's favorite topic, right?
It's very fascinating.
So what you actually received in the packet for tonight, I know it had been asked for a couple times, and we had put it together, was a comparison of the recommendations that had come out of the sewer planning work group at 50-50, and then what the differences were between what you had voted on the 6th of October, I believe it was, at 60-40. So we put this together to just show a lot of the interest was around the betterments, to show at the 50-50 when the sewer planning work group had voted, we were not using 0% interest. We were using 5% interest on most of the projects, and for that. We were still using an 80-20 breakdown, but we were using interest on the entire project regardless of the cost. So when you voted in October, we had very good knowledge that we were actually going to qualify for the reduced 0% interest, which is where the majority of this came from, because we had taken 80% of the project costs and assumed no interest on them over the life of the loan. So this is really informational so that you can see that even at 60-40, there is a reduction based on versus the 50-50, and the primary driver is the assumed 80% at 0% interest. Okay. If you want to pull that up. What I've been working on the last few days, the new one, yeah. That I sent you. Yep, no problem. So I've been working extremely feverishly to try to get this done. Unfortunately, I had a misunderstanding about some of the parcels, so the assessor has to redo some of the land values. So the sheet before you actually uses the last certified values, not the most recent certified land values, but it's to try to give us an idea of where these costs are headed. During the Capital Program Committee and at a subsequent Board of Selectmen meeting, you had asked us to review the costs. This sheet now has the most recent updated cost of the project by area. Nantucket Warren's Landing, originally when we had started this whole entire process, had been projected to cost $47 million. Based on timing, we've projected that when we get to doing it, it's going to cost us $61 million to do. Somerset originally had been estimated to and projected to cost $14 million. When we get to do it, which will be, I believe, in 2017 is when we program that in. The assumed cost at that point is $17.5 million. Every project, as you can see, has gone up. The original costing when I presented back in October was $95 million. It is now $119 million, which is a $24 million increase. I've programmed this to be the same 60-40 split that you had voted. I'll use Nantucket Warren's Landing for the example. Total betterment cost now is estimated to be, based on the previous land values, of $68,000.
in October, it was, I have to go back to that sheet, was $52,000. So the costs are increasing significantly here. I hope to have the new land values hopefully by either late tomorrow or early Friday morning, and I can update that to get a better reflection of this. The tax impact at the bottom is actually calculated with the new valuations. The only piece that hasn't been updated is the land value. But this is just...
Brian, is that really just a distribution issue?
It will be more of a distribution issue internally, and depending on where the averages fall, it could change them slightly. But
Brian,
yes.
Talk to me about the tax rate per thousand.
Yep.
Is that per 100,000?
No. Yeah. So that's $6.14 per 100,000 of value.
And right now our tax rate is what?
$3.31 per thousand.
Per thousand.
Right.
So what's that?
So that
Divide that by 100 to get what the rate's going to go up for each one of these projects.
yeah. So actually, if you go into that sheet, I can actually if you actually highlight 32 through 40 on the side, right over here, yeah, and then right click and click on hide. So highlight 30, yeah, 31 to 41, yeah, and on hide right at the bottom. Okay. This actually shows the actual impact, and then I've broken it into per $100,000 valuation to make it easier for people to divide the total by their assessed value by 100,000 and then multiply it by that.
And
so
this is down here is the average.
That's the old average. I have not updated that from the assessor, but that still does the same thing as adding into the new valuations.
So if we did all four projects, what's the
all the way to the right. If we did all four, the impact on 1.6 million average, the assessed value would be 205 in October. When we did the 60/40, it was 194.
Okay, so scroll up to Somerset for me for a minute here.
Sure.
Because the betterment for Somerset, the Somerset area is going to be around 41,000.
Well, that's showing you what if we had divided it equally. We are actually using the land valuation, so you're looking at the 46,000.
So it's 46,000
for an average. That's the average
roughly per household. So they're going to pay $2,400 per year for 20 years.
Yep.
So they can pay it all at once. Plus, once we run the pipe, they got to pay the hookup fee, which is what, Kara? $2,000. The privilege fee, which is how much more? How much? 63. So that's $8,300 plus the privilege fee. Capacity fee. Is there another fee, or is there a third, or is it just two? So, and the only reason we're doing Somerset is so we can get zero financing. Is that correct? Because it gives us a zero financing. We don't need to sue.
I think that's the real answer. They won't.
Well, the other answer.
They would tell you the
because I'm just looking at this list of homes, and I'm going into the warrant and looking, and it's Meadowview, it's Marsh Hawk, it's Friendship, it's all our year-round neighborhoods that all these residents are now going to get hit with an extra $3,000 a year for 20 years, plus another $10,000 that we're going to mandatory tell them they got to hook into this pipe, so that the people in Nantucket who have the collapsed sewers, septics that don't work, can get a 0% financing.
I don't think it's quite...
You're going to have a heck of a time selling this at town meeting.
No, I think we are, but I don't think it's... If we sell it like that, we're dead on arrival. I don't think that the...
Well, that's how it's going to be interpreted, I think.
I understand, but the reality, though, in Somerset, I had a house in Somerset, in that what would have been that area. I was in Austin Farms, and my septic failed 3 times in 12 years. And I spent $50,000, $40,000, some huge number back then. I don't know what it would be today to fix it 3 times. So there are people, not every single person, Bobby, I agree with you. There's going to be some that probably have great systems working fine. But there's a good swath there. That the ponds are having trouble there, and there's a good swath of homes that were in the same situation I was.
I think to get this even to have a remote chance, somehow or another, this has to be tweaked to say that once the pipe's in place, your system is inspected annually, and you don't have to hook in and pay all these fees until your system fails. Because there are people in these neighborhoods that have perfectly working septic systems that they've maintained that aren't that old. It's going to be really hard to get the votes at town meeting. If you're going to tell them all of a sudden that you've got to abandon your working system and come up with 10 grand right off the top the first year, and then another 3,000 a year for the next 20 years.
Bobby, I understand. That's why, I've been concerned about adding Somerset in the first place, and interest-free may make it economically, so that you have to do that. But I haven't seen the trade-off. As if you do charge interest and skip doing Somerset, what happens? Nantucket would pay more.
We'd all pay more.
Well, we'd all pay more. But another way to think about it, in terms of the hookups, because we talked about this as maybe a Board of Health issue, it seems to me that in trying to think about it, it's not, I think from the Board of Health's point of view, it's in the public health interest to require hookups. Whether fees are charged is really up to the sewer commissioners, I think. So there are two different, you know what I mean? There are different issues there. So the sewer commissioners might be able to do something about fees, which is us, yes.
Dawn?
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't we have to run the pipe through Somerset to get to Nantucket anyway?
We do.
So maybe we just need to do some tweaking with.
Well, we do, but we don't
when
have to
people
run all
have
the
to
little. We
connect
run
and
one
so
line
forth.
down Bartlett Road. We don't have to run it up into all the neighborhoods.
Well,
and
the
stuff.
idea of doing all the sewering
Was to get
is
to zero.
to improve the water quality.
Mhm.
And the only way to improve the water quality in the Nantucket end is to take the systems out of the ground and connect everybody
But
to sewer.
the systems on Bartlett Road are not going to improve the water quality in Nantucket.
Right.
But they
But
are
they're being forced to hook into a system
They're
so
in
that the
an-
people in Nantucket can get zero
No,
finance.
their area does affect the Hummock Pond area. So they have impacts as well.
And then some of that is in the, when you go over a certain line there, isn't some of that in the harbor watershed?
Mm-hmm.
Once you go over a certain line in my comment.
Yeah, the needs areas are because they impact the water.
Yeah, so there's a lot that there are a lot that don't, but there are a fair number that do
I'm
as well.
just saying.
I agree with you.
Especially in a 60-40 split, you're going to have a hard
Now,
time.
one number I've thought about tonight, and this is for you, Brian, more than anyone, I think, is because, as you say, Bobby, when we don't do these things, they go up 4% a year, et cetera, and then eventually you have to do it, and you kick yourself because you didn't do it. One number I would like to see, or we need in our Q&A, is what was the number if we did it without 0%? Say we don't vote either of these at town meeting. Everyone gets up and they all want theirs, and everyone's yelling and screaming. No one can agree on anything. We don't vote it. What are the numbers without 0% plus inflation? What are we going to be looking at 3 years from now when the state gives us a consent order and we have no choice and we have to do it?
Well, what we would have to do is these numbers here. So Nantucket Warren's Landing has been costed using about 4% all the way through the project start date estimated of 2019. So 61 million is what we are projecting it's going to cost by that time. So the only thing that's really going to change would be your betterment and your tax rate, because we'd just go back in and plug an interest rate in instead.
Exactly, but but the number could be. We were saying, what was it, 8 to probably 11?
It would be
it's probably
substantially
$11
higher
million.
because you're adding
0% financing is
right.
going to be about 11 million.
Yes.
And then you're going to add 4.5% on 100 and something $100 million. So you're going to be talking $20-25 million to push it off.
An increased capital cost.
An increased capital cost to push it off 1 year. I think it's going to be in that ballpark.
I get all that.
That's important
I
to
just
explain.
I know that for myself personally, the issue right now is the downtown harbor, the town harbor, and the water quality in the town harbor is much worse off than the water quality in Nantucket, and this is a big pill to swallow just so we can get zero financing. We're trying to do everything at once, which I'm not necessarily against. I'm just saying
we got to understand it.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot. Their tax bill's going to go up $130-something a year. Now they've got a betterment for the next 20 years. They've got a hookup fee, a privilege fee that we could possibly waive if we decided, but we're still going to have to come up with that somewhere else.
Once we set these numbers, they're set, and if we waive it, then it's either going to come out of the taxes or it's going to come out of the sewer.
The rate.
Sewer group
Right there.
Yeah,
And, I don't think
and
anybody.
which they've had. Part of the reason that it was going to only go on these two places is because those people had already faced huge increases over the last few years.
I'm just bringing up questions that are going to come up
yeah,
once we
And
adopt this
other
form.
people are bringing up that old question too. If I was in Nantucket and I put in a $50,000 alternative system last year, am I going to get some credit for that? In the same kind of question, Bobby. So we have to deal with that one as well. Just to be clear, Brian, the Nantucket number includes running the pipe all the way to Surfside Road?
No. It's the Nantucket Warren's landing number as presented starts at the end of Somerset and goes to that area. So if you were to remove Somerset, we would actually could go back and do the calculation, but then you would have the Nantucket Warren's landing area would pay for the pipe at that point from Surfside all the way, and it would be cutting off all of the lateral connections off the other streets in Somerset that would be.
No, I understand that part. Do I remember also that the pipe from Somerset is going to have to be a separate pipe all the way to the plant? No. Well, where does it connect to the main pipe?
Somerset?
Yeah.
At the force main.
Okay. So the force main is sizable enough to take this.
Which is where on Surfside Road?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Doesn't it cut up through next to Sachem's Path?
Yeah.
So it would come down
So that's-
Bartlett and then go up Surfside Road to about Sachem's Path and connect into the force main there.
So that's the main connection. So if you didn't
At the
do
pump station on Manny Dias's property.
So if you didn't do Somerset, you'd have to bring the line and charge Nantucket for that cost to bring it over to
And
the force main.
and you're opening up the road, but you could put the stubs at least out to the side roads if you decide.
Whatever. Yeah.
I mean, I just think of all those people that live in those neighborhoods that are, year-round working class families, and this is going to be,
This is
it's a
huge.
hit.
Yeah. Well, and they were facing a lot. And then the other thing, this is, we want to make sure that we position these. If Monomoy is our priority, if that area, Shimo, is a priority, we want to make sure we do that first, and then do Nantucket second in the town meeting.
Right.
I mean, so some of this, we're also going to need a.
And then you're going to need to understand the financing if you just did Monomoy versus doing them together.
Yeah, if that happens, you have to be able to answer that
Car,
one.
can I ask you, like the plus section for Monomoy, those are all little areas in town that got somehow left out of the sewer district, but
Correct.
the pipe mostly runs through those areas already, right?
They
People
are
already hooked
they're
in.
nearby. Yep, they're very short
Yeah,
connections.
so those aren't going to have, how much was it to do the plus section? 13 million. So it's still.
And the only reason, not the only, but a reason to do the plus again was to get the ratio correct on for the zero rate.
Yes,
finance.
Monomoy can't be done without plus. Matticat can't be done without.
But
zero.
Monomoy
To get zero
could-
financing.
To
Yeah.
get
To
zero.
get zero.
But Monomoy could be done by itself, Bobby, just Monomoy,
Right.
which has a different,
Right.
economic considerations.
But the projects have already been approved together, so we would have to reapply.
And some of the plus parcels should be sewered. They wouldn't be. They
Absolutely.
They weren't added because we don't need to do them.
No.
Right, but it's a different sort of reason.
No, I understand, but some of those are still in the in the harbor watershed, or some of them are still abutting ponds, and there's still issues with
I was looking for a
these
list of the plus properties in the zoning bylaw
Just
change. I don't.
One note at our group today in terms of identifying these places, Monomoy is now Nantucket Harbor, Shimo, because that's really the location.
So people understand what we're talking
Because
about.
most of Monomoy is already sewered. So it's Nantucket Harbor, Shimo.
We also need a warrant article.
Sorry to interrupt.
We'll need a warrant article for, deferments? Yeah, so that's another thing that we need to make sure we put on, and we'll probably talk about that later. But
What's that do? Give us the authority to issue deferments? What's the?
It's
warrant?
a local acceptance of chapter, I believe it's 80, Chapter 80, Section 13B, which does give you the ability to enter into agreements to defer betterments.
Okay.
With a set of conditions. The first one being that if the property is sold, it's required that the betterment's paid off at that point. There's a whole list of questions or guidelines in the acceptance of the statute on what you can do, but it does do that. One of the things we'd have to work out, as I had talked to the group this morning, is doing some of these things then still does require us to find a secondary funding source if the goal is to keep none of this in the sewer rate, because when you vote 60-40, it's the 40% is set by, if it's passed that way, would be set for what we could, for the project cost and the tax rate. If you defer betterments, then those dollars have to be made up somehow. So I'm not saying we should or shouldn't do it. I'm saying that that's one of the things we have to think about as we move forward with that discussion.
Unless you can find a way to ask the deferments to show themselves, they ask for the deferments prior to setting the tax rates, prior to getting the numbers to set the tax rates. If you have the deferments, by a date certain prior to that, then it is less of an impact.
Right.
And it's the same if somebody has a very valuable lot in, let's say, Nantucket, and and they're like, well, I just want to keep it exactly the same, and I don't want to ever do anything else, and and they're not, may say they don't qualify for the deferment. There may be an opportunity to do conservation restrictions or envelope restrictions on the properties to bring the value down. But we want to know if that happens. We have to know that prior to doing this. So that so there's some major. If someone is really aggrieved,
so that changes the distribution.
Changes the distribution. So you want to do that.
That one would change that would change the distribution within the area. A deferral would change how where we're getting the funding to do it for them.
Yeah,
So.
and in most cases, if they've got a really valuable property in Nantucket, it's probably, there's probably it's probably large, and there's probably the benefits are probably going to outweigh the huge assessment they're going to get. But if they don't want to do that, we may want to have an option like that for people.
Right.
Any other questions?
Only other comment is the first screen. We didn't really talk about it much. It doesn't matter. It sort of matters now, but I didn't support the sewer planning. Like I didn't support going to to 60-40 because I was worried that it was going to change those numbers substantially. And as we kind of suspected, the numbers were still, for an individual property owner, the numbers were still less because of the 0% financing.
Because of the 0% financing.
I'm not sure how we're going to meet with the sewer planning work group, even though they don't exist anymore. And one of the things we have to remember is there's sort of two sides to this. We have people who are on septic who don't want to pay anything. And so, what the sewer planning work group was doing was trying to strike a fair, reasonable balance that would work for both, for people who are on septic and not on septic. And, Dual, and who's kind of representing the people who are in Tom Nevers, et cetera, in areas that will never have to be sewered. They have a strong contingent of people who didn't want to see it all in the tax base. And he was the lone vote. So maybe your 60-40 split would appeal to him. So we still have. It's very difficult.
Right. It's not just him. I think
it's also. I'm not trying to beat on Dual.
Even people who are on the sewer but are not in the district. So people on lots of people. And I think in a raw numbers basis, we got to be practical here. There are more people in that category than are in the other category.
Exactly.
By a substantial number is my guess.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people that's in the septic system zone that's never going to see pipe.
Yeah.
That I personally don't mind paying $133 a year to have clean harbors, but I look at the guy that lives in the area that is now going to have a pipe go by him. I'm paying $133. He's paying $4,000 or $5,000 a year. Plus, he's got to pay $8,500 when the pipe comes by his house. I mean, that's the guys that are going to be standing up screaming bloody murder.
I mean, the reality is if they have to put in a brand new system at some point, it's probably going to be more expensive than these
Ernie,
numbers.
how much is a regular septic system? Yeah. Not everybody needs to put a Title V system in. Not all those people in Somerset and Monomoy, they're not going to need, on Bartlett Road are not going to have to put in a Title V system when they upgrade their system.
You mean an alternative system?
Right.
An
A lot of them, all they got to
alternative
do is put in the expansion field. They don't even have to change the tank. They just have to disconnect the old one at the D box and run the new trenches. So there's a substantial difference here, and they're not really getting anything out of it. They're not getting an additional bedroom or an additional dwelling or anything like that. They're getting a big bill, and they're going to be the ones. That are
Why
gonna
wouldn't they get additional bedrooms?
No, so
if
you'd
they
have to go
wanted
lot
to?
by lot. Some will get nothing, some will get substantial benefit.
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
they're constrained by
there's
that.
got to be something in place to address this. So
Well, I think
that
it's just something. I'm just bringing
can
it
make sense for
to light
everyone.
because we need to think this all out between now and April, because otherwise we're going to have a steep hill to climb here.
Mr. Chairman, speaking of which, at the group mentioned today that met, we talked about sort of a kickoff meeting about our public outreach. Not really a kickoff, but a continuation. So just to let you know, an update about that, what we discussed was getting out an FAQ sheet, a direct letter to affected property owners, a newsletter, and a presentation outline. The presentation that we're talking about, we're in the process of sort of identifying groups that we will go to or invite to us to discuss what the proposed projects are all about. At your February workshop, we already had scheduled the review of the 2015 water quality testing results, as well as an eelgrass survey that we talked about several months ago, a staff water quality update, and we would like to put on the agenda as well a discussion about these projects or an overview, review of them, and invite various groups to it to ask questions or express concerns or whatever, so that we can know kind of what they are and be able to address them. And we did get an email yesterday from a citizen who was asking specifically about public outreach, and he had some good questions about it, one of which had exactly to do with the septic system issue. And we talked about that a little bit at our meeting today, because that's probably going to be one of the things that people really have concerns about and questions about, so we should have some level.
You mean where
of
they have
answer.
recently installed systems?
If they were
Right.
recently installed.
No, I know that's an issue in Nantucket, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, just so you know, we have begun this. We talked about doing a kind of a panel discussion on NCTV or something like that. We talked about going to the Builders Association, other various groups, the Civic League, Nantucket Civic Groups, Town Association, things like that. So just so you know, we've started that, and we'll be keeping you posted as to how that's going. We hope the newsletter will go out next week, as early as next week, hopefully.
Anything else? All right. Good first start. I didn't mean to be the pessimist here, but
No, we
No,
we
but
all
just,
should be.
just the increase in cost is by itself a
That's
number.
hard enough.
That's probably the
I know
biggest nut.
I know a lot of those working families that live in that neighborhood. We all do, and I know I don't want to be the one to look them in the eye and tell them they got to pay.
We haven't even talked about the maintenance of this new line, staff that's going to be needed to look over that, and the implications of the long-term budget.
Yeah, but you have to realize, like, the numbers we have here, what is it? We're looking at tax impact of on 100,000. Are we almost doubling it? If we put it all in, we'd be almost doubling the taxes, wouldn't we be? It's like 784. Tax impact was, 784, and that was at that split. So, and if we're at what, 3-something per 100,000 now?
Well,
Yeah.
we're at $133 at a 40% split for the average home.
But you can't. You can look at that, but then there's a lot. You have to also look at the easiest way. I look at it slightly differently. I look at, because some people own more valuable homes, some people own businesses, and you have to say, well, let's just make it a simple. Let's say our tax rate's $3, and it's going to go to $6. And it's going to be $3. That's a 100% increase. So it's going to double. If the thing is $3 and it's going to be $6, you're going to be tripling everyone's taxes. So you have to look at it, and this doesn't count the school and anything else.
Oh, I know.
So that's, it's sort of, people have to realize there's sort of a misconception that things are free here, that the rich people pay and stuff is free. Well, we've gotten to the, I was been warning about this for 15 years. We're at the point where it isn't free anymore, and people have to realize there isn't any, it's not an easy decision, It was kind of that way. It isn't that way anymore. Things are going to be very expensive, and we have to try to way to mitigate it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention, back to the public outreach for a second. The sewer planning work group had a section in its report about public outreach. We went over that today, and we'll be incorporating a number of the components that are in there into our plan. And one of them that Dawn mentioned earlier was, they noted, and we've discussed this too, that the neighborhood names for the needs areas was very confusing. So Monomoy isn't exactly Monomoy, it's really Shimo. So we sort of titled it, and we're going to put it in the newsletter, so we should start calling it what we've retitled it. And Shimo isn't really Shimo, it's Shakamo. So we've renamed that Nantucket Harbor Shakamo. Just so you know, and we'll get that into the literature.
Okay. Libby, we're going to move on to the warrant.
Okay, you I think received today an updated draft warrant, which already has changed. I think I got a number of things via email today that I was not able to look at yet that aren't in here yet, but I can kind of go through and identify with you what is in the works right now. I think I sent you a copy of an email that I've sent around to different staff people about what is still needed, and so some of that has come in and some of it is we're still waiting for. So I guess maybe the easiest thing would be to go through the warrant. Last week I mentioned that we were working on updating our seasonal salary schedule in Article 7. I think I have that now, but I wasn't able to get it in here quite yet, but that is coming. There were 3 airport articles, which I think one is coming out, and I may have gotten the wording on the other 2 today, but I haven't had a chance to get it in yet. The school article is still being reviewed. I think we talked about it last week, but we didn't quite have it in yet. That's being reviewed by legal and bond counsel, and we need a Department of Revenue, at least by town meeting. We'll need a Department of Revenue okay on the article. The article
is this to increase the bond?
Yeah. Yep. The sewer appropriation articles are being reviewed now by legal and bond counsel. And Matt, you said earlier maybe we ought to switch them around in order.
Yeah, in order, and maybe put the deferment article prior to them. And we have a discussion of if these further pass, this is how we're going to do it, because that addresses one of the concerns people have.
I think we should do Monomoy in front of Nantucket.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
And
so
if we're going to come up with anything to help address some of the year-round people who will be really burdened by this, is it going to require some kind of an article?
No, if we're going to accept the deferment for, I think it's age and income.
No,
So
but I mean beyond that for people.
I don't
Or is
think-
that a Board of Health?
I don't know if that's I don't know. I don't know if we'd have we'd get it done in time, but I think it's almost a policy decision. She's talking about an article for
help address these concerns that are going to come up that might make this whole effort, not pass.
we could move, I don't know if this is one of the things you mean, but we have 2 articles in right now that relate to sewer betterment assessments and the length of time and the interest rate. And there's a home rule petition that is sort of a fallback in the event that legislation that Representative Madden filed, which I understand is pending the governor's signature, in the event that somehow doesn't get signed before you approve this, we'll have that in as a backup. But there's also an article in the event that it does get approved to accept the general law that will result from the home rule petition. So we could put those 2 here.
That's the same issue.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Okay. I had a note on what's numbered as Article 20 about whether or not we could combine that article into the FinCom motion to the revolving fund article, and I'm advised we should not do that, so that'll be a standalone article. Article 22, this is kind of an FYI for the board. You're going to be getting the county budget at the end of the month, and that $170,000 number is going to change as a result of a increase to the county budget relating to some takings that we should set aside damage awards for. Article 24, I'm waiting to hear if we need that or not.
To be back to the county, that's assuming the county does the taking, so the county would need access to resources?
Correct.
Okay.
Can we just stop on the CPC articles for a minute? I just have a question. Under housing, I see a request for Housing Nantucket, Phase 2 of 4 community rental units at Surfside. The CPC appropriated $261,000 to this, but they've withdrawn their 40B application. So I'm a little leery about authorizing them to get $261,000 worth of housing money that they're just going to sit on. At the time, you probably didn't know that when they came to the CPC. So
just came up.
we might. I
Well,
don't know if
Mr.
you're going to.
Chairman, we've invited Housing Nantucket to attend your February 3rd meeting to discuss the status of that project and probably that issue. That would have to be dealt with in a FinCom motion anyway.
Okay, but I just wanted to bring it to everyone's
Linda
attention. Oh,
has maybe an answer.
Because they have, I guess tomorrow, formally withdrawing the 40B request, the Pocket 40B, I have asked that the matter be put on the CPC meeting next week on Tuesday to discuss how we're going to resolve this.
okay.
And I believe, Andrew can speak to this better, but the property is in the zone that would be affected by what we passed at the special town meeting, where they could avail themselves of sort of a Pocket 40B under the new zoning bylaw, which means they would come to the planning board and they can go back into the 4 units. So we're going to try to work this all out within the next week.
All right. I just didn't want the
then,
money.
Right, but so then you might want to keep the money if they can do that.
That's what I'm saying. If
Well,
it,
and
if it
that's
works
fine.
out,
I just didn't want it to
we
be,
can do that, right?
you know,
when it passes the town
Sitting
sitting
dead.
for years.
Yeah.
While they're waiting.
Yes.
Right.
There's a
I'd rather
current
use it. They
article
can come back in a
from
year.
us.
Yeah.
There's a current article from us at town meeting that would allow them to avail themselves of coming to the planning board.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
and just to be clear, I actually have a conflict with that property because I'm a butter, so
Right.
I did not vote on
I
that
just,
funding
no, I
portion.
know, Linda, in the past where we've given them money and they've sat on it forever, and I just soon, that's going to be the case, I'd rather pull this out at town meeting through a FinCom motion, and then they can come back in a year when they got all their ducks in a row.
We would certainly, probably the CPC would support that. There's just so much unknown right now.
Right.
That
right.
a lot
I
of it
just wanted-
hinges on something else
I
happening.
just wanted to bring it to light, so.
Yeah, we're on top of that.
We're gonna hear from Ann. My understanding is they plan to do it, but they didn't have the money or the wherewithal to do all 4 units now. But if they tried to do all 4 units, they'd have to get a CO on the whole thing.
They decided not to fight the resistance at the ZBA, so they backed off to 2.
All right.
That's where it was left.
All right, I'm good
So
with
we're
it.
good.
I just want to make sure we're just not putting money into a bank account to sit there for a while, so. Okay, go ahead, Libby, I'm sorry.
Okay, still waiting for, I don't think I've gotten it yet, a revised article on the coastal erosion liability, and then we'll need the board to determine.
No, I talked to council, they're drafting, but I haven't seen it yet.
Okay. The remainder of the zoning articles, I think, are still getting finalized and reviewed. Yes. I actually didn't print out the version that is up here, so the page numbering might be a little bit different. But Erica, if you can go to, I think, somewhere around page 55-ish. Last week, I told you we were working on a bylaw relating to transient housing. This is the so-called Airbnb issue. Roberto gave me a draft article. It's being reviewed by town council, so that is in. There it is, yeah.
Well, who requested this article, just out of curiosity?
The Lodging Association requested it, and then you all had a bit of discussion about it and said, let's see what it looks like. So here's what it looks like.
Page 55. It's 3 pages.
Last time, last week, we talked about eliminating the requirement to print the warrant in the newspaper. I'm waiting on an article from town council for that. That actually is going to need to be a charter amendment because that provision is in the charter. Oh yeah, so I struck that other part out. The sewer district articles. I think I mentioned this last week. We have the different locations in different articles right now. I think there are 4 articles in right now. We're going to combine them into 2, and maybe we should. And we do have Monomoy now called what do we call it again? Nantucket Harbor Shimo in first, so that would correspond with what we just did with the appropriation articles, right? So we'll make sure that stays like that. And then Mattocket and Somerset could go second.
I didn't see the plus ones in here.
It's in there.
There's a lot of Mattocket ones.
Whew. It's around page, well, I think it's somewhere around page 60. Is that it?
It's after the Mattocket? Oh, yeah, I see it here.
It's right after what's titled Monomoy right now. So those are getting reviewed as well. And
Libby, I just wonder, after the discussion about the sewer, if maybe if the appropriation and the maps might be together, so they're not separated, in different sections.
What do you guys think?
If you don't put it in the district, why would you appropriate it? You mean?
Well, yeah, that you might have your appropriation article and then the sewer district after that. So they're kind of co-located together. Obviously, we're having I think, the main discussion is about appropriation of the money, and if it's appropriated, then it follows that you're going to add those properties into the district. But it might just make sense to kind of group those together.
I was thinking the same thing.
Almost 2 out of the zoning. So we do the appropriation, then we do the addition to the district, then we do the appropriation, then we do the district, then we do the rest of the zone later on.
In a different spot.
Kind of makes sense.
And that way you mix up the zoning articles. It makes it nice for people.
Well, and we have to think, what are going to be the popular articles, and if we want people here if you want more people there for the sewer stuff, you want to make sure you place them right.
Well, they're pretty early in the meetings.
They are, I know.
Okay, so we'll do an appropriation and then a district and then an appropriation and then a district.
Yeah.
Okay. The sewer betterment assessment articles I mentioned, and those are in here now, but I'll move those to, like we just talked about. The water company merger, I think I'm still waiting for a final on that. There are some home rule petitions for land bank real estate transfers that we've approved in the past, and there might be a new one. I'm just waiting for finalization on those. Airport real estate articles, I think I now have, and so I'll get those in. 40 Sparks Ave and 42 Nobedere, I didn't have anything on those. Do you know about them, Andrew?
Town council's writing the 42 Nobedere, and then Sparks Avenue, I think there was a question, Libby, because there's a citizen article that's already been submitted, right?
Yeah. So actually, I skipped the community housing bank, so let me get back to that in a second. 40 Sparks Ave, I think, was on a list at one point, but I think the discussion was if there was a citizen submittal, then we wouldn't put one in. So there is not a town one in, unless the board wants to put one in. The community housing bank, I can't even remember if I think I got a revision from last week in here, but it is still under review, and the formatting needs a little bit of work. Oh, yeah.
And just to clarify, the cutoff on the recommendation, is it in here in typing? In other words, is it for transactions and only the amounts above X, 2 million, 3 million?
2 million.
And so are we comfortable with 2, 3? I mean, I guess it depends how much money you think you're trying to raise. But I just want to make sure we all know what we're doing here.
Yeah, I was wondering why 2 million. I was thinking it could track the, be 500 and track the, 500,000 and track the exemption they use now. And we talked about it being on the seller. We all talked about it being on the buyer side, but then it's written, I think, on the seller side. So there were a couple issues that I thought.
Right, that was another
Yeah,
issue.
there were a couple changes.
But I think when this originally
Probably
came up, the idea,
redesign.
Matt, was to charge, the higher end properties, and that's why it was 2 million and up. I think that may have come from the original.
It did. It did.
And I'm just, with inflation, should that be 3? I'm just sort of asking.
Oh, I think it should be, at the minimum, I think it should be $1 million, because you look at the numbers and how much you raise. If you're just doing 2 million, I think it was, I think Tucker could tell us, what it was, how much was it at 2 million? What was it projected at? Was 2 million?
Yeah, Tucker Holland. First, I want to thank the Land Bank, who've been very helpful in helping putting this together. And they did an analysis on a 2 million threshold would have generated 2.5 last year in a year where the Land Bank generated 20.
Yeah, okay.
And so if we dropped it to 1, we could do an analysis. It might generate substantially more. And if we're going to, and part of what I was trying to do was, it was written to be about only for sewer that's going to be used for the affordable housing. I think it should be. I think part of how we get this passed at the state level is to have this be able to fund sewer in its totality. With some threshold, some percentage. 50% maybe of the money has to always go to affordable housing, but some other percent has to go to sewer. And I think that would help. It would help us at the state level because they know it's an unfunded mandate that everyone's having trouble paying. And I also think it would help, in regards to our sewer project. If we all of a sudden were bringing in another $3 or $4 million to a year or more, and some of that, a good amount of that goes to sewer, that brings those numbers down pretty quickly. It helps. So I think there's a couple reasons that it should be a lower number.
You just have to be careful. That we don't just assume we're going to get $3 or $4 million. We could have another recession like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of indicators out there that say that this is going to start to go the other way. So.
So your point is that's a reason to go lower, or what do you mean?
Well, no, I'm just saying
don't lock onto the number.
Don't lock onto the number,
Yeah,
and
I
don't
agree.
spend the money for sewer improvements that we think we're going to help defer this mega cost. We can't. It's not a set thing.
Yeah, so you only get what you get.
Right.
I totally agree.
But I'm talking about when we did this last time, there was a strong real estate lobby in Boston who was against it for anything because they were having issues.
And they're going to be there again.
Well, yeah, they will be, but they may be less likely to be there if it's for infrastructure and things that their industry needs. If it's
But they're also looking at this going, the first town to get something like this, it's going to open up all the Cape towns, especially when you start adding sewer into it. I almost think you're better off to leave it, I don't know, maybe just leave it housing and say we're unique. We have a difficult situation here with very expensive real estate. We can't live in the town next door. It might have a little better sell than when you add sewer into it. Now you take every town on the Cape and say, well, look what Nantucket did. Why can't we do the same
Right,
thing?
unless the towns on the Cape want it and help get it passed, but
Right.
that's another
Which
issue.
may be a whole other route to go, but,
Right.
So, if I can just say, I think a lot of great work is going on behind the scenes with town council, bond council. This thing can be ready to go. There really are 3 business points I think that need direction from the board. You're talking about one of them. It would be the land bank's recommendation. What you just said, Bobby, to keep it simple and focused is going to be more likely to sell at the state level is their advice. But that's...
You mean that's on the use of the money?
On the use of the money,
Just to be sure, yeah.
So the 3 business points that just clarity from the board would be helpful on are, do you like the 1%? Is that the right number? Should it be on the buyer or the seller? Because I've heard mixed viewpoints on that. And the land bank, again, from their opinion, would be on the seller would be preferable with the $2 million exemption, and they think that would sell better. And then the sewer flexibility issue.
Well, the question is it going to sell? I mean, I'll be cynical for a minute. Is it going to sell better, or is it going to give them less complaints from people? Because it's sort of we have to look at it from our perspective. We have to look at it from the town's perspective, not just the land bank's perspective. So,
yeah, I think they're just trying to give their best advice, given having gone down this road before.
yep, I understand.
So again, we need to decide if it's $2 billion and up or not, right? We need to decide how the money is going to be dedicated to be spent, for sure. And what's written in here right now on that? Is it all sewer or what's all
No,
affordable
it's all
housing?
housing.
It's all
So it's 100% affordable housing.
And it specifically sets up an organization with board members to handle it, like the land bank.
You mean to run the bank or, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a separate board, it's elected, it comes from the affordable housing the first year and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
It sounded like, obviously there's going to need to be staff and office things and
Yeah,
stuff. It
you
sounded
always get
like-
worried when the first thing out of their mouth is to hire people, but anyway.
Well, it sounded like possibly the existing land bank staff could.
You're not going to do this with a bunch of volunteers. You're going to need an administrator, you're going to need a staff. It's going to turn into the land bank all over again. You're going to be spending a couple $100,000 a year just to keep this thing rolling.
Yeah, but this is why I thought it was easier if we tagged it onto the land bank. They're already collecting it at the end of the year. If the buyers pay it and they're going after the buyers to get their money anyway, we put a little bit, 0.5% more at $1 million or whatever the number.
Collecting, it's
the
the
money
easy
comes
part.
out of the transaction no matter what.
Yeah, but then we funnel it. Like we
then-
collect it, it comes to the town funnels it to, Affordable Housing Trust or where appropriate.
Yeah, but
Well-
that's
Yeah,
not,
but that's-
like I said, collecting it's the easy part. It's where you spend it on. You've got to have someone who goes out and actively looks for the right piece of land. Then you've got to have someone who negotiates the price, deals with the P&S. Now you've got a piece of land, you've got to build a house on it, or what you got to. If you're doing prefabs, you're going to have to order them. This is not just, hey, we're going to have $5 million here. Let's just fix housing. No, it's going to take a staff of
And
at
then
least
you're
three.
going to have to monitor
Well,
who these
well,
houses are
the
going to.
The way this is written, this is a funding agency. So it's
Right.
not a developer. So it would be working through either a private developer or through existing nonprofits that were.
But then I'm not going to support this because I'm not going to sit here and collect a tax to give to a developer to make a profit. You're going to have a bank of money. You're going to have a volunteer board, and Joe Blow, the builder, is going to come in and say, "I'm going to build 20 affordable houses," and he's going to make 20% on those houses. So we're taking money that we took from people, and we're getting 20 units, but he's putting a healthy sum in his pocket. I just don't see that working efficiently.
If you elected to work with a private developer versus.
Well, who else is there in Nantucket? If we don't have our own staff in place to go out and find the pieces of land and do the development and go through the HDC and get the plans and then hire a general contractor to work for this organization to oversee these projects and be the project manager, we're going to have to go with. Is this just going to be a funnel to Ann Kutzpa's organization? We're just going to keep handing them money and they're going to find us houses? I mean, we can't just think about a funding source without thinking where the funding's going to go.
Right. I think part of the concern that I heard was just sort of, are we building a big new organization? I think the idea would try to be as efficient as possible. The land bank has talked about areas where, for some fee that needs to cover their time, but there's existing staff that could be utilized to do
I
part of
understand
what
that,
this is.
but the land bank staff is not a developer.
Yeah,
And
correct.
the land bank
Yeah.
staff has
Yep.
a staff of, 15 that take care of their properties?
Yeah.
We're going to need a staff to take the money from the bank and make houses out of it. Somebody's going to have to do that, and you're not going to find anyone in the building trades to do it for nothing. They're going to want to make money.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I agree with you. So the question is, if the money comes in and we are, the Board of Selectmen, Town Administration, the Board of Selectmen determines where it goes, whether it be Affordable Housing Trust Fund, Housing Nantucket, wherever, we have the control on that.
We won't. The way this is set up,
the new board will
elected
have.
board will.
No, the elected,
Whoever it is.
Yeah, the elected board will, it comes to us before it goes to them. If the elected,
I don't think it's intended to work that way. It's
I don't
intended that it goes, I think it's intended to go direct to
This new
this
organization.
group, new organization.
Right.
And The idea is more
If we
than
feel
just
differently, then we ought to talk about that right now.
So maybe that's
creating
maybe that's how
units.
you
It's
change it.
about down payment assistance and rental assistance and other things for existing
You're losing me.
housing units.
You're losing my support real fast here on this. I
Yeah,
I
well,
see the
that's
quagmire on the other end of it. The
that's why it's
concept
worth
is
talking
good, but
about.
the backside of it is not good right now. It's not planned out, and I gotta be comfortable with it. I'm not there right now.
So Bobby, so you're suggesting you're hesitant because you don't want to create another entity.
No,
like-
I'm not against creating another entity, but I want to know that we're getting the most bang for the buck.
Right.
And just to have a pool of money to give to
Yeah.
people for down payments and for rental assistance, I'm not supporting that.
No, I
I
get
had a
that.
vision
I'm not
here.
either.
I had a vision of
Yeah,
something else. I thought we were going to take this money, we were going to actively pursue land, whether it's conservation land that we buy and swap with the land bank for land that they have that could be potentially housing, and then we do what's happening at Sachem's Path, whether it's rentals or affordables. The people that are developing Sachem's Path are making a pretty penny on that. They're not doing that for free. We need our own entity to do that so that we don't, I mean, you're going to, it may take a staff of 4 or 5, but
Right.
it's going to be less money in the long run. You're going to get more for your money
Right.
by having our own staff to develop these projects than to just paying someone like whatever the name of that company is that's doing Sachem's Path to do it. You know, I mean, the concept is great, but I think we need to really think this through because these are questions that are going to come up at town meeting.
Yeah, no, these
and
are
also
great-
at the state level is like, well, yeah, you got a tax, but how are you going to administrate the money? And just a part-time board
is
isn't
not
gonna be able to
appropriate.
do it.
No,
I
I
mean,
agree.
look, the land bank has a staff of 4 or 5 in the office. Granted, they collect a lot more money, and then they have a staff that maintains their properties.
And
We're
these,
gonna need
these properties will have to be maintained and
Exactly,
monitored.
there's going to have to be funds set
So
up
that's
for
either
maintenance.
going
and-
to another
no,
organization
I-
to do, or it's being done internally.
Also, go back to your comment about mortgage assistance and all that stuff. I'm very reluctant to see the town or any public monies get into that business.
Yeah, that's even more
That's a really
complicated.
tough thing. You're in the selection business of.
I mean, maybe the simple way is you use the money to buy land, and then you put RFPs out for the land, and let developers develop the land, whether it's rental units or it's
Which
or
is
houses
almost
for
sort of what
sales.
we're doing now.
But-
We're giving them
Or you
lots,
could have
and then they have to
individual
do something.
homeowners.
But the problem is there's not
Develop
a lot
it.
of dirt left, so I don't, you can collect this tax in perpetuity, and in 15 years, there's nothing to buy with it. So, Linda?
There are a lot of, Dawn alluded to it earlier. The Housing Authority would get land, and we'd RFP it out to whether it's Habitat or whether it's Housing Nantucket, and then they would, and we also have a monitoring agreement with Housing Nantucket for affordable units. There are multiple prongs involved with creating affordable housing, down payment assistance, gap assistance, but for that down payment assistance or gap financing, we would get a covenant back. So these wouldn't be a free-for-all for either the developer or someone else coming to us with a project, a Pocket 40B, let's say, or something under the new bylaw. They would be required to enter into a legally binding agreement, whether the covenants are in perpetuity or they're for 10 years or 20 years, and if the property is sold, they would pay the trust back. So it's a lot more complicated than just developing houses on vacant pieces of property. We've also bought distressed pieces of property. That's how we got 7 Surfside, because it was distressed and it was a fire sale. So you have those kinds of things. You also have people with the garage apartments or cottages. We would buy down a covenant on that to make it an affordable unit for a certain amount of time. So there's a lot of things that would come under any type of program like this. Clearly, we have to develop a little bit of an outline for that. But it wouldn't be just buy a piece of land and build 20 houses.
I think we need to have a definitive outline of how the money's going to be spent before we can, for me, to support this. Before I can support this at town meeting, I need to know. I want some type of roadmap as to, okay, once we collect the money, how's it going to be managed? What's it going to go to? That kind of thing, Tucker.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of step 2, because you've been hustling on this, which is great. So now you start to think about, okay, I got the money now. How do I do it?
Right away, it could go to funding the housing that we need out here for town, for town employees.
Well,
so
this could be the first.
That's what I'm saying. So we could say it can only do that to start, or it can be, or $1 million or $2 million could go to buy distressed properties, or $1 million, and the rest can only go here until this is built out. I mean, we could put constraints on it now. I'm just thinking out loud.
No, I hear you, Matt. I think though Bobby's right in the long term, and if the state wants to go along with this, and I think the state is in my take. I think the state has some interest in trying to find ways to build affordable housing. It's important for the state as a whole. It's not just Nantucket's problem. That this issue is going to need to be sorted out. Is where the money, how it gets spent in a smart, efficient way.
This is a tax in perpetuity. It's not like we're going to collect this for 5 years, and then when the project's done, we've got it paid. We're stopping it. So we need to think about, okay, if we're collecting this for 20 years, what are we going to do with the money in 20 years if we're getting $2 or $3 or $4 million a year?
Well, just to answer that. That was another question. There's the Section 15. Any time after 5 years of the effective date of the act, the town may dissolve the housing bank by the majority of the vote of the members of the town meeting by fee imposed by Section 9. Just to address that.
Well, that's good. I didn't get that far into it.
There's a lot of information here, Bobby. But
yeah, I know.
There's too much information.
Too much information. But the idea is you could end it at some point through town meeting. That is laid out here. I don't fully understand the details of it.
I think it's a good first step, but I just think we need to think a little bit down the road.
And
yes.
This is
yes.
Yeah. That's what worries me. So, yeah. Once you put a tax in place, it doesn't go away. All right, Libby, ready?
Yeah, I want to express a little bit of a concern that this is complicated. It's being put together very quickly. It hasn't been vetted. I can see people haven't even read through it yet. I haven't read through it yet. I'm just cautioning that, I don't know
we could keep working on it for next year,
well,
but we've got to start.
I know people really want to get it in, and
it
may not be
come
ready.
up at really the last minute here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When do we have to adopt this by?
Next week.
And once it's in, we can't pull it.
You can't pull it. Now, the
make
FinCom can
recommendations.
have a motion to make adjustments and things, but I don't think they know anything at all about this.
They're
So
going to have a
they-
ton of questions. You think I'm asking you hard questions? Wait till you get to them, because this is not a,
I think Tucker sees that.
Yeah, I think you just said, Bobby, a few minutes ago about another article that this we can get something in, but it needs to be thought out between now and town meeting. And so there are a lot of details. I totally agree. We're just trying to keep the ball moving forward here, and boldness has genius in it. So begin it now, as Gota said. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, I guess really, Eric, you go to the very end. The last thing is ballot questions. These need review by bond counsel, and Brian and I were talking today about how to write them in such a manner that the 60-40 is reflected. So that's a discussion that we're having.
If on town meeting floor, for some reason, the split gets changed, how do we address that in the ballot questions?
Well, yeah, that's part of our discussion with town council and bond council about how to write them.
Will we have to have a special election potentially?
No, I don't think so.
Which we used to have anyway, Bobby. But
it may be that you don't reference the 60-40 in the ballot questions because the way the article is written.
As voted at town meeting.
Yeah, got it.
But we need to have
and that incentivizes you to show up at town meeting.
Yeah, the transient, just two comments before, because we're about to end, I hope. The transient bylaw we should all read. I read it quickly. The definition. Transient guest house rentals and homes.
Transient.
General town bylaw that we just got tonight. Rentals of rooms, the way they're defining it, transient guest houses or guest rooms are those who are staying in a private dwelling charged at a daily room rate. So if you could say, oh, are you going to, if someone's charging you 2 days or charging you for a week, does that mean they're not included? So we have to figure out, is that the right proper definition? It's requiring a parking space, which may or may not, is probably not appropriate in the downtown area where we want to actually encourage these because they don't have the parking space. So those are just two things I found right off the top.
I'll tell you, the thing that concerned me about it mostly is who's going to enforce it. We're already short on manpower. These guys are going to go around and bang on people's doors to see who's been in their house, who's not been in their house?
But Roberto.
I mean, do we really want to take this on?
Well,
just to I mean, I know.
There's a lot
know.
of articles here, Bobby. That's a good question.
As far as enforcement goes with these, all of these rental houses and anything, they're already subject to the housing code. We're already enforcing most of these dormitory lodges. So what this would be is just expanding that regulation.
But this is the Airbnb is what this was targeted for. This is like I list my house on
absolutely
for a week and say somebody wants to come stay here in my guest bedroom.
No, absolutely. It's already subject to the housing code regardless of whether it's done through Airbnb or not.
I know, but how do we enforce it is what I'm asking.
So the enforcement aspect would be, unfortunately, a lot of it will be through having to scour Airbnb and see which ones have been permitted and which ones have not. Airbnb, home away, vacation stay, things like that. We would have to go through those listings to see which ones have been permitted.
So a house now, not a room.
Yes.
A house on Airbnb, on HomeAway or on VROB that rents the house for a week is now going to have this license?
Only if they're charging on a daily room rate. So if you're doing it weekly, if it's like a weekly vacation rental, it's not going to be subject to this bylaw.
It's how they're advertised.
It's how they're advertised.
But they're all advertised that way. If you go on to VROB, my house in Vermont says 4-day minimum rental.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you the rate per day. It doesn't give you the 4-day rate. It gives you the rate per day. This is a Pandora's box that we do not want to open, I think. I don't know. I mean, then I'd have to have a license from you to rent my house for the week?
Because it's subject to the housing code.
How many houses there are in Nantucket that rent through VROB and HomeAway? You're going to need a staff of 100 to chase this stuff down.
Well,
there's potentially
we
another
even
way.
do prorated rentals through the real estate offices for long weekends and things in the shoulder season.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody comes for 7 days.
We don't have to do this.
That's what I'm saying. Do we really want to do this?
It was a suggestion by a constituency that sees an issue, and so this is the way other municipalities are handling that issue.
So to which constituency, just to be clear?
The lodging.
Okay, just want to get it out there, Libby, you know.
Yeah, and I agree with them. There's an unfair playing field right now, and it's not. They're getting. They're competing. Look at them. They're getting. It's an unfair situation, and I think that's.
So this was a way to get at that without going through the rooming tax issue.
Yeah. Well, that's.
I can see this already. August 1st, your phone rings Monday morning. You get 50 calls from guest house owners saying this person's renting their house. This person's renting their house. You're going to be on the road all day long chasing down leads. Or I just.
We got to worry about the harbor.
One of the thoughts I had when we looked at this 10 years ago, one of the thoughts I had was when you pay your taxes, you assert that you have to check a box whether you are going to be renting your house on a short-term basis under 60 days or not. And therefore, if you find a violation, they've basically, they've basically lied to the town. So you can find there's other ways to put pressure on this. So the enforcement is kind of secondary. If people are going to lie about it, and then they are going to get caught, they're going to we've got some more teeth to it.
There are ways to do this. Many ways to do it. This is just one avenue.
Just for another point of view, I think it's also important to keep in mind that there are a number of folks who are renting their houses in the summer as a way to live here year-round. And I just think that's important to take note. And how do we incentivize, small business essentially?
It's not even that. I'm more about we do these things because someone says, or a constituent or whatever says, we need a rule, and we put it in place, and then we tax staff because we just keep adding all these regulations and requirements. I'm ready right now to make a motion that we pull this article right now because we don't have the manpower to enforce this article in the summer. We just don't. You need a staff of 20 to chase all this stuff down.
We need a staff of 20 to chase most of the regulations that we
Exactly.
already have.
We can't even do the fertilizer regs in the harbor and stuff. I'd rather concentrate on that stuff and not something like this.
And maybe another way of looking at it too, Bobby, is maybe if we focus more of our energy on a housing bank, we're addressing the funds to in a different way, in a more direct way, that's maybe a little cleaner? Do you know what I'm saying, Bobby?
There's a lot of people that rent their houses here for whether it's a week or a month or.
But this whole industry has had an impact on our affordable housing. A lot of these houses used to be rented to summer kids. Now there's an easy way that you can bypass, the real estate agents and everything else, put it online yourself, and so we've lost a lot of bedrooms that used to go to seasonal employees are no longer there. So
it's also
it's having
also
impact
all
on
these
us.
people that are staying in these houses are supporting all our businesses, all the restaurants, all the everything. It's also, like Tobias said, a lot of these people are able to keep their houses and live year round because they rent them out for a week or two or
there's
three.
Just a lot. There's a lot to think about on this one.
Well, the other way to do it would be to get rid of the commercial tax rate, and then at least the bed and breakfasts aren't paying twice as much as the people that you're competing with. That's another way to. It still won't completely level it because they've got inspections and a bunch of other things. But I know every chance I get, I think, they're struggling too, Bobby. The small businesses who are paying commercial tax rates are struggling as well.
There's a big difference between a bed and breakfast that has 20 rooms that are renting rooms out for a 3-night minimum or a 4-night minimum to 30 different people, and a family coming and renting a house on VROB for 4 days. There's a big difference, Matt.
Yeah, I agree, and so why the renting the house is a better deal for the customer. It's a better the better deal for the owner, and it's a crappy deal for the bed and breakfasts. They're under a lot more rules and regulations, and than the other.
On the other hand, our lodging taxes keep going up, and their occupancy seems to be pretty high. So I'm not quite sure.
They're doing just fine. I made a motion to pull this article.
We've lost 1,000 beds. We've lost about 1,000 beds in the last 15 years, 900 or so now.
I made the motion to pull this article. I haven't heard a second, so I guess...
I'll second the motion.
I thought we didn't do motions on...
We don't.
All right. We're not in the workshop anymore. We're going through the warrant.
But I think let's go back. I mean, seriously, I'm not sure I fully understand the intent here.
I get the
intent of this article is to level the playing field.
I just think it's unenforceable.
But what is the intent? Just to be a pain? Make sure they're licensed?
Renting out individual rooms. Like I'm living in my house and I'm renting out three of my bedrooms and I'm serving them breakfast.
But that's not what VROB and HomeAway do.
No, they rent out entire premises.
VROB and HomeAway for houses in Nantucket.
VRBO, but sorry, it's VRBO.
Yeah, whatever it is. I mean,
and Airbnb, they're two different.
Well,
So just again, tell me the intent of the article. It's to make sure that I can't rent one room.
No, you can still do it.
No, you can still do it. You just got to.
You got to pay the town for a license. That we're going to determine how much it's going to be.
And
you got to keep a register in the house. And I mean, we should read it.
Yeah, make sure you read it. I wouldn't.
I'm going to withdraw the motion for now. We're going to see the warrant again next week, but I'm tell you right now, we're going to revisit this next week.
That's good, Bob.
What?
We would, yeah.
Take everything else off the agenda so we can do this.
Yeah, we probably would.
Well, maybe we will.
Well, when we formally adopt the warrant, we can pull articles at that point.
Yeah, or we have a special meeting and just work on the
we
warrant.
might be here till 11:30.
I think if we're all educated and we get our thoughts around it, we can have a quick discussion.
Read it.
What some of this bylaw comes down to as well is if you go on Airbnb or VRBO or the other ones during the summer, you'll see things that are posted on there. You'll see sheds posted with no access to bathrooms, no access to running water. I actually condemned an area just last month that a person was living in with no water, electricity that was pirated off a pole, no heat, no insulation. And these types of things are advertised on Airbnb, and people are actually paying to rent these.
But this rule is not going to stop those people from advertising.
It's not going to stop those people,
you
but
can still close those things down even without this rule.
You could still find them, but right now there is no self-regulation. So nobody is calling us saying, my neighbor's renting 3 sheds. In this case, some people, you start getting the self-auto-regulation, which I have seen in other towns.
It's not going to happen in this town, I don't think. Anyway, we'll discuss it next week. Everybody take a chance to read it. I just don't see how you can you have the manpower or the time
Well,
to.
we definitely
to
have
enforce.
priorities, Bobby, but let's think about it for a week.
It would be a little helpful to know if you're leaning away or towards, if you possibly can, because next Wednesday, this has to be in as final a format as I can possibly get it, so that
You
it
know
can
where
get
I
to the
stand.
paper to be advertised the following week, and not that you care, but there's a little bit of time that has to go into putting the article into our format and finding a place for it in the town code, none of which has been done yet. So that kind of work, if we're going to do it now, then not have you adopt it.
I'd prefer to focus on the housing bank and pull it.
Yeah,
just as far as priorities
I
go.
think that we should think a lot more about this.
Yeah, right now it works either way. From the health department, it works either way. We're going to be catching people renting out sheds and renting out properties, whether we have this regulation or not.
Right. You're not going to check every house that's listed on
VRBO. But I mean, it's just doing this, which the intent seems to be the Airbnb. You know, it seems unfair, and I don't think we want to get into policing every single
All right,
vacation
I'm putting my motion
rental.
back on the table.
I'll second the motion.
Don seconded it. All right, we have a motion to pull this article from the warrant. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, 4-1. It's one less you got to deal with, Libby.
But I will say it is something that we should discuss, and let's keep it on for next year. You know.
Thank you.
I think a Cape Town did something, Libby, when you're talking to your managers.
Yeah.
I forget which one did something very somewhat licensing or something.
Do we have any? Is that? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go, Bobby.
Was that the last? Did we go through all of them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so go ahead, guys. Knock yourselves out. I didn't know if there was any other questions. Anybody have anything else?
You did an excellent job. Thank you, Mr.
I don't know about
DaCosta.
that.
He's being really nice to you tonight, Bobby. I don't know what it is.
Well, we had
It's a new year. It's a
We had
resolution.
nice discussion about bikes.
Can I move adjournment?
You can.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Because we should do something about it, but and not because it is getting worse.
Right. And again, it's like, if it's past the town meeting, it's years. I mean, it's, you know, it's not like. I mean, a lot of the times, yeah, well, but then there's no incentive. Maybe. $2 million over here. $2.5 million. Yeah, just to see what. Yeah. I will never do this. I think Greg might be back with us on Sunday.
Oh, really? Oh, that would be fun.
He said it's okay. I never get those texts back. You know what I mean? Like, is there any data across the state, for example? Maybe once, and it was just by town. She looks at what the sales are. Brian? Okay. You know what I mean? What the average, what the sales listing is for each town. Yeah.